as we get started this morning, I really want to welcome the AIA Los Angeles president, Greg Varabian, who's a design director and principal at HKS Architects. He's going to share a few opening remarks. Thank you, Greg.
All right. Well, thank you, Will, and thank you for all of our attendees. This has been a great, the first 2 days were great. I'm sure day 3 will be a great cap to all of this. I enjoyed going into a lot of the breakout sessions and just kind of hearing a lot of different perspectives. And I hope today it gets us to kind of our next step, which is about outcomes. You know, on day 1, our speakers observed that the system for how we deliver housing as a service needs to be completely overhauled. You know, if you really want to achieve more rapid and equitable outcomes. Equally important, of course, though, to building the housing is the need to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. So the session was a reminder of the human cost of being without a home. Day 2, positive and real solutions. Our speakers observed that we need to embrace a wider array of housing typologies, especially tailored to the needs of our communities, as we need more flexible and urgent approaches to scaling up our housing solutions. It was a reminder that as designers of housing, we must put ourselves into the shoes of those that we create, that are going to live in our creations. And then today we're going to hear from Alice Kim, FAIA, and our featured speakers on how we can better assemble and share the tools and resources we as architects need to address the multifaceted challenges to homelessness. These tools include ways to better understand the differing perspectives and how to synthesize otherwise opposable objectives, ways to cultivate deeper access to a diverse group of stakeholders, and ways to strengthen our social infrastructure and how we can connect with the communities in which we serve. During our concurrent breakout sessions, we heard your ideas on action items we can move forward as a chapter. And AIA-LA will assemble working groups on each of these action items and establish a roadmap to achieve measurable results that will improve housing and access to housing for all. So as president of this great chapter, and on behalf of your board of directors, thank you for your involvement in Design for Dignity. Now I'd like to welcome today's session leader, Alice Kim, FAIA. Alice.
Hi, Greg. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I hope you can all hear me clearly. I just wanted to start by giving a shout out to 2 members of the AIA LA staff, and that is Will Wright and Corinne Ellingson, who have really done a lot of hard work to get us all here. So thank you very much. As Greg said, I'm Alice Kim. I'm a partner of John Friedman Alice Kim Architects located in downtown LA, and I'm going to be loosely guiding this discussion, but mostly I'm going to be listening and learning just like the rest of you, and really thinking about how I can personally, and in our practice here, meaningfully address this challenge from our skill set and our perspective. So I thought I'd start by bringing up some of the memorable sound bites from the last 2 days of Design for Dignity, not only because they were so well spoken, but because in their sort of clarity, I found them to be very profound and therefore worth repeating. So in no particular order, Wade Killiford described a quote unquote rupture of the social contract between government and our systems. Absolutely, he's right, and that's why we're here. Homelessness is just a result of this. It's not really itself a cause of anything. So we need political will to change things. We need leaders who are willing to take hard positions, and we need to take those hard positions too. So for example, we're never going to solve this affordable housing crisis until we have mixed income residential communities spread all across our entire city. This is difficult. So we have to vote out the folks who won't fight for this, and we need to advocate for it ourselves in our own neighborhoods and through the projects that we work on. That's really the only way we can get out of this. Molly Reisman made a very wise comment that we are not going to build our way out of this. We need to fix social inequity if we are going to find housing justice. This is true, but at the same time, I keep reminding myself we do need to build. We need to build cheaper, faster, better. We need to build more. We also need to build well. That is what we as architects are qualified to do. This community And this is where we can bring our quote unquote superpowers of creativity and imagination that Natasha Hicks so aptly put it to help. One of the things that really was very striking and resonant for me was a comment that Sean Spear made. He talked about the fact that once you have a home, you really don't worry about it anymore. It's sort of the stable, safe place from which you can actually go out and live your life. You can go out and do the things, connect with people, connect with your community. You can do the things that really make us all human. And I think that was a really important thing to remember, because even though housing is a human right, the things that come after housing are also a human right, and those include public access. It includes access to space. It includes access to amenities, to art, to technology. It includes access to jobs and productivity, and of course, creativity. And so all of this is really a human right. Housing is the thing that comes first, perhaps, but we need to also sustain people once they are housed. And this is really important, and it's something that we really can't forget. Pete White used the word houseless rather than homeless. I thought this was also a really important reminder that language is important. The narratives are important. And in fact, they're kind of key to shaking down and rebuilding and in organizing and uniting communities. Community activism was brought up several times over the course of the 2 days, the first 2 days, and how important it is to really get yourself in there and advocate and become part of it, really just participate. So I think that if there is a theme that's going to underlie today's dialogue, it is that of information and the language and the narratives that we use to disseminate that information. And related to that again is that word advocacy, which has everything to do with presentation and persuasion. How do we say things? How do we make them compelling so that people will actually listen to us and therefore we can get things done? And this is really in the interest, again, of getting everyone on the same side. This is something that Michael said over and over again, communication. How do we unite? How can we do this? Because the end goal to me is really making sure that there's no you or they, but there's really just sort of an us, and we're all listening to or telling same sides, different sides, but of the same story. And to me, that's sort of another way to define justice. So that's kind of the underlying premise of, sort of today's discussion, but we'll let the discussions go where they will. We've broken it up into 3 parts to make it a little manageable. There are no breakout sessions today. So the first part is going to be about how our cities are talking to us. So we'll hear from city officials and officers of housing in various places. The second is going to be about how organizations and advocates do their work. And then the third is going to be how cultural narratives engage us and how we hear those narratives. So I'm going to rattle off the names of our panelists in the order that they're going to speak, but what I'll do is I'll introduce them in groups of 2 or 3 as they're going to come up and speak. But they are Amy Anderson, Bill Huang, Mitch O'Farrell, Kelly Bernard, Simon Ha, Ivy Pachoda, Haik Mukmarian, and Doug Smith. Doug is a journalist with the LA Times, and so, if he has extra questions for our panelists, other panelists, he may help myself and Will and Corinne in asking some questions. But let's get right to it. So part 1, how our cities are talking to us. We're going to start with Amy Anderson, the Chief Housing Officer for the Office of Mayor Garcetti, and she will be followed by Bill Huang, who is an architect and the City of Pasadena's Housing Director. We also have council person Mitch O'Farrell from CD 13. He can only join us for a little while, so when he gets here, we'll let him speak right away because I think he only has about 15 or 20 minutes, but he is the chair of LA's Homelessness and Poverty Committee. So we will welcome him when he can get here. If timing doesn't work out or he ends up being late, we'll move right into the second part and we'll just be flexible. So with that, I just would like to welcome Amy Anderson, our first speaker. Thank you.
Hi, Alice. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate being included in this morning's panel. I want to say, a huge congratulations to AIA LA for its 5th Design for Dignity conference. And, kudos to you for figuring out a way to make this happen in our, current isolated context. I'm actually going to share some PowerPoint slides, so bear with me here as we do transition. All right. I'm guessing that works for everyone. Can I see a thumbs up? Okay, great. So I thought I would speak this morning about the mayor's focus on the 2 strategies of streamlining and innovation that are strategies really designed to support, his broader housing policy goals of producing more homes and strengthening the housing safety net for really our most vulnerable Angelenos. I think it's a policy priorities that are based in a recognition that we simply just don't have enough homes in Los Angeles. But even when we have enough homes, there are some who, for economic reasons or disability reasons, need additional housing support. So those 2 goals really form the basis for all his strategies and policies that he's advancing. But allow me to immediately interrupt myself to say, before I dive into talking specifically about streamlining and innovation, I thought I would give a quick update on where we are with affordable housing, supportive housing production. In 2016, the city made a commitment to produce 10,000 units of supportive housing, in collaboration with our affordable housing and homelessness advocates, and philanthropy and business really came together to recognize that historically we were really only producing about 300 units of supportive housing a year. So what could we do to boost that production? HHH, was key in providing additional financial resources to boost production. The goal was to add another 700 units a year to get to 1,000 units a year. So over 10 years, we would meet that 10,000 unit goal. So to date, maybe we're about 3.5 years in. To date, we have completed 22 projects that included 1,300 total units, about 1,000 of which were supportive housing. Right now, we have about 35 projects in construction with over 2,300 total units, 1,600 of which are supportive housing. So we're kind of, ramping up from moving away from that, goal, that historic production of about 300 units a year, getting more towards the 1,000 unit a year goal. We are projecting, which is always a dangerous thing to do, but we are projecting that over the next 12 months, we'll see 26 projects finish completion. And there's about 1,700 total units in those projects, 1,100 of which are specifically designated and set aside for people who are experiencing homelessness, who will receive additional services on site to help facilitate and maintain their stability. So HHH was key to the city being able to produce more supportive housing, helping people to end their experience of homelessness, but it's not enough. So some additional strategies that the mayor has been very focused on are streamlining city processes and innovation. You know, I think many of you know that my background is in affordable housing development. And I think sometimes we get very focused on this idea that an innovation is a product. You know, it's the smartphone, it's the electric car, and it's harder to recognize that changes to policy, to processes, to regulations can also be innovative, and in some ways are essential for the product innovations to even make progress. You know, I think a great example of that is Richard Bloom's, you know, ADU legislation from a few years back, right? An ADU, a granny flat, was not a new product. What was new was a change to the policies, really making ADU construction a by right and allowable use in single-family neighborhoods. Really, like, groundbreaking. I think another example that's a little bit more narrow to the world of affordable housing, but again, for those of you directly involved in this world, I think will recognize that at the beginning of this year, the Housing Authority, which, you know, provides rental subsidies on these supportive housing units, needs to inspect all of the units before a tenant can move in. And they changed a really important policy, which was that previously they wouldn't inspect a unit until the project had received a certificate of occupancy, not a TCO, but a C of O. And that was really slowing down the process. So HACLA changed its policy at the beginning of this year to agree to inspect units based on a temporary certificate of occupancy. Again, I guess kind of maybe nerdy, but to me, super innovative in this idea of recognizing that you know, we as a public agency need to contribute to ways to just to help move people into our units as fast as possible, and what can we do? So I'm showing just a handful of the streamlining efforts here that the city has either accomplished or is working on. I hope many of you know that the LA Department of Building and Safety has created an affordable housing section. This is really in recognition that there is a lot of expertise that goes into understanding how affordable housing projects need to be processed, and kind of the special requirements that they might have. So DBS said, you know, let's build that expertise into a single unit so that it can facilitate the speed at which we're processing whatever our applicants really need. So this unit is helping with the by right entitlement processes, like the Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance, funding application forms, and SB 330. DWP case processing, I'm sure a number of you will remember that in the fall at the LA Business Council conference on housing, transportation, and sustainability, the mayor committed to DWP expediting DWP approvals by 30%. That was a big goal, and it's in process, right? So I think the good news is that DWP is actually hiring the staff and the leadership and working its way towards creating a case processing unit, right, which will facilitate developers and their consultants having a single point of contact at DWP, so that it's not the developer's responsibility to kind of run around to the different components of the DWP, which is a complex organization, but the single point of contact will help to facilitate approvals where they may be needed. funding forms, this is an interesting one, and again, like a narrow one, but recent by right entitlement programs like the Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance or SB 35 or AB 2162. Those are all programs that for certain qualifying affordable housing projects, the entitlement process is by right. But it's created a little bit of complication for the city departments in terms of sign off on entitlement status forms that affordable housing developers need for their funding applications. In part because while those types of qualifying projects are technically by right, they do need to be determined that they qualify for the different programs. So we're in the process, or the city planning department and building and safety are in the process of finalizing a memo that will help developers to understand exactly what the process will be for getting those, really critical forms signed off on. The Affordable Housing Status Tracker is a new tool that the Housing Department, HCID, is building. I think the city has done an excellent job within each of the development services departments in recognizing and setting aside staff to process cases, whether that's at the city planning department or building and safety or BOE. But one place where we continue to struggle a little bit more is in coordination and collaboration across departments. So the Affordable Housing Project Status Tracker will be a tool where all of the different departments can track where a project is in terms of securing its entitlements or getting sign off on the various types of sign off that it might need in order to secure its building permit. All the while fully understanding what the developer's obligations are for closing and starting construction, because that oftentimes is a significant driver as well, is that there are firm deadlines for when developers need to get their projects started. So all of these, I think, are small, but there were recognition that collectively all of these small process enhancements are designed to make the process easier, less complicated for the developer and get the projects started sooner. Troubleshooting is just a reminder that my team has a staff member available who is all about just helping with any problems that anybody is running into. So I also, in terms of innovation, wanted to talk about the HHH Housing Challenge. Really, this is the cornerstone of the mayor's innovation efforts. This is a program that was created about a year ago. The goal of the program is to test innovations that are designed to reduce the cost of building supportive housing and to speed up, get more projects completed faster, but ultimately to bring to scale those innovations that work. About a year ago, 6 developer teams were selected. $120 million was awarded between those 6 developer teams. And between them, the goal is to produce 975 supportive housing units over 3 years. The innovations that these different teams identified fall into the areas of both finance and design and construction. In terms of financing, the innovations include attracting in private equity investment. Most of us are familiar with this idea of private investment into affordable housing through the low-income housing tax credit, but this model is more about social impact investing. opportunity zone financing, which is taking advantage of opportunity zone program that was created with tax reforms. Revolving loan fund. This was a very interesting one that is tied to the use of modular. It's often very hard for affordable housing developers to have available the resources necessary to put down a deposit at the modular manufacturer. So this tool is using HHH funds, which normally cannot be used for a revolving loan fund, but putting them in a revolving loan fund with some other resources from philanthropy, and using those funds to put down deposits. Once those deposits are returned, then others on the developer team are able to use those resources. So a very innovative tool to help affordable housing developers get over that hump related to upfront deposits. Another developer has proposed to use the HHH dollars as bridge financing, where it's a kind of a short-term loan that will get repaid over the course of 3 years. And then another developer is using a simplified capital stack, which, many of you know that affordable housing often involves many, many layers of financing. In this case, they're just using debt and HHH, which saves some money because it's not as complicated, but saves significant time because you don't have to wait around trying to secure the multiple funding sources that might be necessary. On the design and construction side, folks are looking at modular. A number of the developers are looking at modular. One developer is looking at a light gauge steel frame, which I'm hoping will be really fast because it's turning out not to be inexpensive. Small and simple. I like this model. This model is, about not building any parking, not doing, any kind of parking garage, right? It's all wood frame. It's a building design, a courtyard building design that is replicable on a small lot. So they're doing multiple projects and kind of saving money over multiple projects. And then adaptive reuse is another approach that one of our developer teams is using. Again, with this idea of this could be faster because the bones of the building are already in place. And I just wanted to highlight that one of the developers is also looking at an operational innovation, which is about doing shared housing. So I wanted to just, wrap up by saying, again, part of the goal of the housing challenge was to explore innovations, but part of the housing challenge was also about an iterative process with a community of developers for them to say, these are innovations that we think can help with cost and with speed, but here are the ways that we have problems using these innovations, right? Again, this idea of how can the city government play a role in smoothing the way for the use of new tools. So this first, the modular inspection MOU is accomplishment that we're in the process of signing this MOU between the fire department, the city's Department of Building and Safety, and HCID's accessibility housing program. And it's a tool where each of those departments has signed off on what the process will be, what the standards are for reviewing designs of modular units and inspecting. Right, that inspection is supposed to happen up at HCD, but we also want to make sure that the designs of these units that our developers are getting built in these factories are meeting all the requirements. So this MOU lays out specifically what that process will be. We've also heard from our developers that some of the covenant restrictions that we typically use are a hindrance to private investment. So I think that that's a really important consideration for us to take a look at. There are really strong reasons why we have 55-year covenants on our affordable housing projects. But I think there's a lot of interest in trying to figure out a way to attract more private investment into affordable housing. So are there circumstances where we might want to consider some kind of adjustment to the covenant restrictions to accommodate those kinds of investments? Our developer who's looking at adaptive reuse is urging us to explore whether the adaptive reuse ordinance can be expanded to different areas and made a little bit more flexible. Pre-development financing, again, just that idea that the revolving loan fund that team is using to help with the modular process, is that another change to the way the city finances its projects and makes its funding available that we might want to consider? Right now, the city does not fund pre-development financing. That was a tool, right? Back in the days of CRA, that was a tool that was readily available to our affordable housing developers, but not anymore. And maybe that's a change we need to think about. And then lastly, I would highlight that as awesome as the shared housing idea was, our developer has run into challenges with that because of the rules and restrictions related to project-based Section 8. So I think it's going to be end up being a little bit difficult for them to pursue exploration of that model. So I just end by saying, just this idea of action and where the actions are headed is that I think the architecture community in particular is really well positioned to identify challenges and to help with incremental changes that, while small individually, really can have a collective impact on how quickly we can get more housing and in particular more affordable housing constructed.
Thanks, Amy. A lot of great information. We're going to hear from Bill Huang next, and then after Bill, we can take some questions for the both of you. Bill.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you everybody for being here. Thanks, Amy. So my name is Bill Huang. I'm the housing director for the city of Pasadena. By way of background, I have an undergraduate degree from SciArc and a master's degree in architecture from Harvard's Graduate School of Design, where I was classmates with Alice, by the way, little known fact. Really transitioned from practicing architecture, being an architect, to including or adding to that development, and in particular with a focus on affordable housing development. And that was really sort of driven by being dissatisfied that by the time a project landed on my desk, that so many of basically all the fundamental decisions had already been made. You know, where the project was going to be, what it was going to become, who it was going to serve, and I wanted to be part of that decision-making process. I thought that was the sort of creative space that I wanted to be a part of, really to be able to initiate, conceive of, and initiate, and to drive projects. And so out of graduate school, I got a job with what's now Abode Communities. It was called the Los Angeles Community Design Center at the time, and it comes out of the Design Center movement, which is an AIA initiated movement. So anybody interested in community design, any architects interested in community design, should definitely explore the Design Center movement. But anyway, at Abode, so I was started as a development project manager, developing affordable housing projects, then became the architectural director, and then the deputy director in charge of both architecture and development. And that's where I really wanted to be. Eventually transitioned out of there and became the county's, moved over to the public sector kind of mid-career to become the county's housing director there. And when I left the county, I was overseeing the housing authority, housing development, the community development, and economic development work of the county, and then moved over to the city of Pasadena to be the director of a new department that Pasadena started about 11 years ago, which is a housing department. And the need grew out of a affordable housing project that just blew up in the community and was a huge failure. And so the response from the city was, well, we need to create a department that really focused on affordable housing. So I moved over there. I've been their first and only housing director. And there we're not just, we do housing development, we oversee the inclusionary ordinance, we're also the housing authority. So we manage a Section 8 program, FASH vouchers, rental assistance program. And then we're also a continuum of care. So we manage the homeless programs, and I'll talk about continuums of care in a minute. We also manage the community development work, all the CDBG funds. We administer, and we also administer just for fun. We have an endowment, and then we also administer a social enterprise, job creation social enterprise. So let me share my screen real quick. Here we go. Can everybody see that okay? Right there, okay. Somebody described me as an architect, and I actually let my architectural license expire a few years ago because I figured I was so obsolete from an architectural perspective, I wouldn't even trust myself to hire myself to do anything. So, and plus my architectural career, I think, was doomed by when my immigrant mom, well, she was so happy that I got into Harvard's Graduate School of Design. She said, oh, my son's going to be the next Frank Lloyd Wright. And, I tried to tell her it's not Frank Lloyd Wright. They're not all F's, Mom. They're not all F's. But anyway, so that career was doomed. So, we're really concerned about homelessness. We think that addressing homelessness, it truly is a Sisyphean kind of endeavor, pushing that rock uphill. And I think that we are at a point where that rock, rolls back down to the bottom, and we have to start pushing up again. We're hitting the point where we have, we think we're going to have exploding demand and yet significantly decreased public resources because of deficits at the local level, city level, county level, state level, federal level. That it's very disconcerting. We're very concerned about what's going to happen in the future. So we all have to figure out how to do a lot better at addressing homelessness. So I figured my contribution here as a city, Pasadena is 23 square miles, 140,000 population. We're only the ninth largest city in the county. We've been at this a long time, and I think my contribution is just to show what we're doing and how we do it. None of it is rocket science. We haven't solved homelessness, but we think we've made a lot of progress. And we think because it's not, what we're doing is not rocket science, we think that a lot of it is replicable in part or in whole by other cities. So let me just launch right into that. Continuums of care. Continuums of care are these HUD constructs of these agencies that receive federal dollars to address homelessness, and they plan their own strategies and they implement their own funding strategies, and so they receive their own money. Some of the money, primarily federal dollars, but we've seen a lot of money come in from the state recently, and a lot of that money is allocated to the continuums of care or COCs. So this is a map. It's a year old, but it's the map of the COCs in the state of California. There are 44 COCs, continuums of care. All of them, with the exception of 3, are either at a county or a multi-county jurisdictional level. Many counties coming together to address their homeless problems, or a single county to address their homeless homeless issues. The three exceptions, there are three exceptions: Long Beach, Glendale, and Pasadena. We are three city-based continuums of care. So these three cities say, we'll take responsibility ourselves for our own homeless neighbors, and we will address those needs, plan for those needs, fund those needs. Here's a close-up. By the way, the red COCs are those that have been that had an increase in homelessness between 2018 and 2019, and the blue are the COCs that had a decrease. So here's the statewide. And you can see most of the state were in a very serious housing and homeless crisis. Close-up of Southern California, you can see there's Glendale and Pasadena. There, right below Pasadena is listed Long Beach. So Long Beach was almost neutral. They had a 1% increase that particular year. But surrounded by counties and cities that are experiencing really severe, significant increases in homelessness. This was a study put out by the U.S. Conference of Mayors at the end of 2016, and it looked at over 30 cities and over 20 states with respect to dealing with homelessness. It was actually homelessness and hunger, but on the homeless side, this is a table that looked at just the overall reduction in the number of homeless folks for the time period between 2009 to 2016. The green line is baseline, that's a 0. So, Oklahoma City here had a 2.4% increase. Philadelphia had a 3.3% decrease. So the baseline, the 0 is right there. LA had experienced a 14.2% increase during that time period, 2009 to 2016. Glendale, which was not part of the study, but if it had been part of the study, would have been here at -7%. Long Beach was over here at -42%, and Pasadena was here at -54%. In Pasadena, this is our homeless count history minus the current year's history, which I'll talk about in a second. But the dark blue portions of the bars are the sheltered homeless, and the light blue bars are the unsheltered homeless on any particular year. And so in 2010, we felt like if we didn't significantly reconsider and readjust what we were doing, our numbers would continue to increase. So in 2010, what we decided to do was a few significant changes. One was we shut down our homeless intake center, and we replaced it with homeless outreach workers. So instead of asking our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness to come to us, we said we would go to you. Because the folks who really needed the most help, the most chronically homeless, the most vulnerable, were not coming in to us. And so those were the ones that we wanted to target. And so we shut down our intake center and replaced it with homeless outreach teams that would go out. We emphasize measures that would prevent homelessness and measures that would end homelessness. And we're not that smart, but we eventually did figure out that the only thing that ends homelessness is a home. And so we focused on permanent housing solutions, both for the very high acuity, folks that are chronically homeless with multiple disabilities, as well as the majority of the homeless individuals who are lower acuity. They're primarily homeless because of economics, because they've lost a job, because the jobs that they do have don't pay enough. They still have to live in their cars, et cetera. So we switched the priority. It didn't mean we stopped our shelters. No, we have a lot of emergency shelters. We have shelters for men, for women, for families. We have a bad weather shelter. We've had those for decades, and we had them for decades, and we've left them in place. But we really started to emphasize homeless prevention and permanent housing. So in 2011, we started to, well, 2012, we really started to see the change. The number went down. Our latest count in 2020, which is not on this list, the number went down again to the lowest level it's been, 527, so a little bit lower than 2016. But the significant change, the thing that encouraged me the most, is that the sheltered percentage of the sheltered population, or the homeless population that was sheltered, went up, which means that the percentage of those who were unsheltered went down. That's what we're really trying to get at. To number one, we want to get folks off of the streets, out of the unsheltered category, get them into shelter, get them preferably into permanent housing, but if not, get them into shelters. If we hadn't done that, we believe we would have somewhere around 1,600 homeless persons, people experiencing homelessness on today in Pasadena, rather than about 500. So what's working? Again, none of it is extraordinary, is rocket science, but what we've built is a custom, sort of using the design analogy, rather than building a spec house or lots and lots of spec houses for a very broad but unknown population, we've built a custom house, something that is very specific, that is not routine, that is not broad, but very specific for our clients, the clients that live in our city, something very specific. So, firstly, we're a citywide continuum of care. And from that, it allows us to do many things. One is it allows us to have a geographic focus. We're involved, I'm very involved in what's going on in the San Gabriel Valley with their Council of Governments, with their homeless committee. We're parts of lots of countywide initiatives. So we care what's happening from a county perspective, but we are focused 24/7, 365 in Pasadena, in the 23 square miles of Pasadena. That kind of laser focus gives us a lot of advantages also. But also we are integrated. As has been mentioned, to produce a permanent supportive housing project, it needs to be heavily subsidized, and you need 3 types of subsidy. You need the capital, the bricks and mortar money. You need rental assistance to pay for the rent, because the individuals or the households that are living there oftentimes cannot pay enough to even pay for the operating expenses for the housing. And then you need services. You need the services to address the reasons why the household was homeless to begin with. Homelessness is a symptom. It's not a cause. It's a symptom of all those drivers upstream that were talked about in the very first session. So if you don't provide the services to help to address those issues, many, probably most of our homeless clients will not remain in the housing. Chronically homeless clients wouldn't remain in the housing. But in our permanent supportive housing first projects, we have about a 93-94% retention rate because of the services. So you need all 3. So in Pasadena, they're all one department. They're all in my shop. Rental assistance, project-based vouchers, the capital money, the service dollars, the continuum of care, they're all in one shop. And so this helps us to avoid the disconnects where, for instance, one agency will fund the capital, but there's no rental assistance or there's no service dollars, right? You need all 3. You have to hit all 3 in order to have a successful project. So being integrated, putting them all in one shop enables us to move sort of seamlessly that way and all together. We won't launch a new project until I get my manager, capital manager, rental assistance manager, and we talk about it and we said, this is the one, we're going to fund this one. We're all on board. It's going to happen. And it does happen. All right. Because we have a very focused geographic area, it sounds pretty common, pretty simple, but our strategy is very much needs-based. It's needs-based. We know what the needs are. We know what the specific needs are. It's just like the family that you're building the custom home for. You know exactly what they want. Oh, they don't want a generic, great room that you might design in a spec house. No, they want a place for this, and they want a place for that, and they want a place for this, and you know exactly what so you don't spend the money building a great room because they don't want it. They don't want it, they don't need it, they want this, they want these other things. And so because we're able to know at a granular level our homeless population, we know what services are available, we know what services are not available, we know what the gaps are, we know what the priorities are, we know what will make the biggest impact. We're able to target our limited resources in a very specific way. It's not unlike, you know, what we're experiencing with trying to address the pandemic, right? The countries that were able to do the testing to know where, who, and where and when people were afflicted, were able to avoid massive shutdowns, extended massive shutdowns, because they were able to target and pinpoint the resources and control the problem there. When you don't have that, you just have, all you can do are very broad brush, sort of one size fits all solutions. Everybody shut down because we don't know who's sick and we don't know where, when, and all of that. So we know the needs very, very specifically, and we can target the resources. We have a broadly supportive environment, and this has happened over years. Last night, I was just mentioning earlier to some folks pre-meeting that we had two new permanent supportive housing projects get allocated their project-based vouchers and then some capital money. Both of these two projects, one is 66 units, one is 69 units. They're both new construction, mixed-use buildings. They both abut single-family neighborhoods. They were approved unanimously by City Council without any community opposition, not even a letter sent in saying, I don't like this project, why are you doing it? That didn't just happen by accident. It happened years of cultivating, years of public education, years of our housing advocates getting out there and really saying, you know, this has got to happen. So we have a broadly supportive environment from the general public, not everybody, but a large segment of the general public, to housing advocates, to our City Council members. They're educated and on board. It also comes out of having a successful track record, out of demonstrating success, and because we are not an outside entity coming in and saying, oh, we want to put homeless people in the motel in your neighborhood. No, we are the community. We are the city. We're looking out for the best, to increase the quality of life for the city, just like all the neighbors and our constituents are. And so we're not somebody else coming in proposing it, but we are the city. We are of the city, and so the chances of success and acceptance are much, much greater. Again, we prioritize outreach, prevention, and measures that end homelessness. And we are very proactive. So we don't wait for developers to come in and propose things for us. Out of the two permanent supportive housing projects that got approved last night at City Council, both of them were initiated by the city. We identified the opportunity, we generate the support, and then we put the money in and make things up. We don't sit back and wait. We're too small of a place. If we want things to happen, we initiate them. It's kind of like being a public sector, kind of developer, if you will. And then lastly, we're sort of nimble and flexible because we're smaller, because we're integrated. As soon as we saw the first guidance for the pandemic, how do you prevent the spread? Well, you stay home. We thought, we got a problem, right? How do you stay home? Oh, you social distance. Well, we got a problem there. We got to congregate. Our shelters are all congregate. We got to decompress. We got to decompress there. We got to deal with people who have no home to stay home with. You got to wash your hands frequently. Well, how do you do that if you're homeless, right? And so right away, our solution went to, we have to move our vulnerable folks into motels. And so very quickly and very quietly, we knew, we poked around to find which motels would be open, would be amenable to this. We found some. We started moving people in, and this was we don't have a Project Roomkey program because we started way ahead of Project Room. Roomkey didn't exist by the time we were doing this, but we were doing it because we just saw the need and we just stepped in. And so we ended up putting 20% of our overall homeless population, about 30% of the unsheltered population into motels. We had them in there for 4 months. We stood the program up, we wound it down. Only one person exited to homelessness. The rest either got permanently housed during the 4-month period, or about a quarter of them have vouchers right now. And so they're moved into bridge housing, temporary housing, in order to be able to find permanent housing. And so we're continuing to work with these folks, but we're able to stand these things up, wind them down, do it very quickly, do it quietly. We're not somebody else coming in and saying, we're going to do this. This is us in the city. And we knew where and when and who to contact. And it's because we have this focus and we're that familiar with our community. So the advantages, all sort of flow from being a city to say, we're not going to rely on somebody else to solve homelessness for us. We're going to do it ourselves. Of course, we tap into county resources, federal resources, state resources. We get a lot of help, but who's driving, who's taking responsibility for homelessness? We're doing it. And out of the 88 cities in in LA County, when the opportunity to step up to do this occurred in 1998, only 4 cities stepped up. Only 4. Pasadena, Long Beach, Glendale, and Santa Monica. Santa Monica, after a while, decided not to do this, not to do it anymore. So there's only 3. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt just for a second, just so that we can have a little bit of time for questions as well. I mean, are you able
to? That's it. I'm done. That's it.
I'm sorry. I think we've also been joined by Councilperson Mitch Farrell. I don't see your face, Councilman, but if you would like to speak, then you can have the floor. And then after that, we can take some questions for Amy, Bill, and you.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Will. I can see myself, but perhaps you can't see me. I'm not sure what that's about, but I can see everyone, including myself, on the list. So I'll just continue. I'll just keep going. Let me first of all thank all of you, and this annual Design for Dignity conference is terrific, and I'm appreciative that your focus is on homelessness specific to Los Angeles, and what a complex proposition that is, and we all know it. So the focus is on innovation, on designing with dignity, and I think that those values tie into exactly what the principles that I have always focused on in terms of homelessness. And we know that LA ranks consistently as one of the most expensive housing markets in the US, and that's nothing new. When I came into office in 2013, we were one of the handful of cities at the very top, dubiously, of the most expensive cities, among the most expensive cities in the United States that had the highest percentage of rent-burdened residents. We also know that the loss of point-in-time count recently was 14.2% increase of homelessness in the city of Los Angeles, and that was before COVID-19. And this was also to no one's surprise because the building blocks were put in place decades ago, I think unwittingly, and I hope to God it was unwittingly, that have really led to the problems that we're facing now over the past few generations. Homelessness and our lack of creating the proper tools to deal with it adequately have been lacking or non-existent. So it's going to take a while for us to climb out of this. But there is, despite the numbers, there is hope on the horizon. Furthermore, there was a 20% increase of homelessness with seniors, more families becoming homeless. And then we also know that seniors and communities of color, in addition to communities of color, are experiencing high rates of homelessness. In fact, Black people, who make up 8% of the city's population, make up 34% of the city's population experiencing homelessness. And all of these conditions, all of this data, all of these statistics feed into the tragedy that people in these categories are much more susceptible, in fact, to the tune of 4 times as susceptible if they live in poverty or homelessness, of dying of COVID-19. So I understand the first panel question I want to address, and that is, we're seeing remarkable collaboration to prioritize housing of our most vulnerable communities, not just because of the emergency protections that we've crafted in Los Angeles, and they have been more robust than any other city, no matter what some folks might say or what you might hear. But even before that, my team and I've traveled the country, Washington and Sacramento more specifically, to advocate for additional funding for affordable housing and support and resources and housing for people experiencing homelessness. But in terms of what we're doing now and what we've done because of COVID, between March and May of this year, we did rapidly house over 6,000 Angelenos who were, for the most part, newly homeless through Project Room Key. We still have the goal of 15,000 to get into hotels because of Project Room Key for people experiencing homelessness. So that mission still exists, and we're working on it. And we have put in lots of sanitation stations, portable restrooms, mobile showers throughout my district, and we're continuing to do that, and that is being taken advantage of by people experiencing homelessness. In terms of rental assistance and protections, we, as a city council, Nury Martinez and I, just individually allocated and reprioritized $1 million each of funding that would have gone elsewhere into our districts, specifically to help renters with a subsidy. And through that $1 million fund, we're going to help 500 households in the 13th district specifically with up to $2,000 to help cover the rent, and likewise for Nury Martinez. Out of that outgrowth one of the outgrowths of that was the creation of the Emergency Renters Assistance Subsidy Program. So we've allocated over $100 million from CARES Act money to to supplement with a subsidy about 50,000 households in Los Angeles. And we're going to have an announcement about that coming soon. So there's going to be more news and more information about that program very soon. What I set out to do back in March when the pandemic struck, and we had enough data then to know that we're in for some real problems, literally and economically, is I set out on a mission to keep people fed and housed during the pandemic, and then keep people on a strong financial footing to stay housed after the pandemic eases. Even if they had a vaccine that came out tomorrow, it would take months and months and months to ramp up adequately and get people inoculated. So the after effects of COVID are going to be with us for a long, long time. I'm going to get to some of those pre-COVID funding efforts in a moment, but just talking about some of the issues that we've addressed and are focusing on with me as chair of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee. We've prioritized protecting tenants and preserving rent stabilization ordinance, or RSO units, increasing the supply of affordable housing, and increasing permanent supportive housing. And again, this was all before COVID. And then during COVID, we've taken full advantage, and will continue to do so, of the state's emergency declaration and work within our constitutional rights to enact all of the protections for renters that we possibly can, while working hand in hand with the state legislature. They've announced a new $100 billion bill that will give additional rent relief and protect small businesses. So we're leaning into that. which builds upon my several trips to Sacramento over the last year plus, which resulted in our needs in Los Angeles being incorporated into AB 3300, which was Miguel Santiago's bill for $2 billion per year for 10 years across the state of California. I worked with Miguel for a year on this bill to make sure that the city of Los Angeles would get its fair share of funding through that. It has a few more steps to go before the governor can sign it into law, but that would mean that the city of Los Angeles, with 1/4 of the state of California's homeless population, and that's a very real statistic, we would get 1/4 of that money. In other words, around $500 million a year for homelessness. That would go toward housing and services. So I fought for a year for that to be incorporated into the bill, that the need would be commensurate, or the funding would be commensurate with the need, rather. So something else we're talking about is streamlining housing productions to more effectively provide affordable housing, specifically permanent supportive housing. So one thing that we can do in regard to architects and urban planners and designers is help us participate in our efforts, get involved in more advocacy in terms of innovative, less expensive ways to build permanent supportive housing. There was just an article today in the paper that across the state of California, it's not just Los Angeles, the average cost of a permanent supportive housing unit or a unit anywhere in California, a rental unit, is $500,000. So it's not just LA that has seen that spike in price for a whole variety of reasons. First of all, permanent supportive housing projects don't just include a nice little apartment for one person. They include a variety of other elements of a structure, space for clinical services. It requires parking. The codes are very, very stringent, and they have to be, since we live in seismic territory here. So we will depend and continue to depend on architects, designers, on innovative approaches. To that end, we have coming up in my committee the $120 million fund from HHH that will go toward specifically innovative approaches and less expensive ways of building permanent supportive housing units. So I would love for AIA to get involved in advocacy, participation, and even putting together a group to apply, respond to an RFP for a project or two. I think that would be really great, because we could show the rest of the state how we could build more efficiently and less expensively these units. Proposition HHH. So in a nutshell, I've been working on this committee now for an hour, that's an understatement, a year and a half as its chair. And we're gonna get to the 10,000 units that the campaign for HHH promised voters in 2016. That's the good news. We're gonna get to the 10,000 units that was part of that campaign of creating this, this $10 billion fund. Within a few years, we think within 2 or 3 years, we'll get to 7,500 units or so. And then we'll get to the rest. But right now, there are 111 projects in the pipeline that will get us to that 7,500 number. And that's either under construction or is already open, including one in my district with 187 units. And then other parts of the city that are opening. So within about a year or two, we're gonna have those opening regularly, a couple of times a month, sometimes one in the same week. But we know that that's not visible yet, because people look out their window and they see that in Los Angeles, we have 41,000 plus homeless individuals living on our streets, sidewalks, and public spaces. And so the reality of what people see doesn't fit with the resources and the effectuation of actual structures. it'll take some time for that to all catch up. Plus, it's not enough. And you won't ever hear me say that's enough. Clearly, as a society, we're not doing something right. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 41,000 people in the city of Los Angeles who are without a house, without a home, without a roof over their heads. So we're working on some other innovative and probably very dynamic developments in terms of how we address homelessness. We need to really have a refresh, a reboot, if you will, and stop approaching this in fits and starts and do something very, very comprehensive and bold. So I look forward to hearing your ideas. We'll be having some announcements in relation to that fairly soon as well. Let's see. Bear with me here for a second. I'm looking at a lot of notes at the same time. Okay, so what I set out to do 1 year ago, actually a little over a year ago, was after chairing the committee for a little while at that point, I realized that the city of Los Angeles had done more than any other city in terms of our voters supported HHH. Our voters across the county of LA supported Measure H, housing and services, to a remarkable degree, $1.2 billion for housing in Los Angeles. I think I said 10 billion earlier, but it's 1.2. That's why I'm having my coffee. And so what I called for was for the state to lean in. I worked with the local delegation in the state Senate and Assembly to match us. I thought if we have 1/4 of the state's homeless population, then and the state budget was flush at that point with $21 billion surplus. I thought, I want some of that money and I want to match. Why doesn't the state match the city or any other city who comes up with solutions itself? In other words, financing the solutions for homelessness. We should create a match program. So I asked for $1.2 billion to match what we were doing so we could build 20,000 units of housing instead of just 10. And then we're talking about a real reduction in homelessness in LA. Well, out of that was the outgrowth of AB 3300. That's one important detail that folks need to understand. And then I began to address some of the underpinnings of homelessness, and that is poverty. So we held the first ever Summit on Poverty almost a year ago, and it was a day-long event with service providers, professionals, academics, but also the majority of the folks participating either had real life lived experiences with homelessness or worked in organizations, nonprofit housing developers, et cetera, and social service workers in a packed room for 8 hours to put together the elements that would create a report called Breaking the Cycle. And so this preceded the dynamic and the zeitgeist that we're living in now with a pandemic and with the demands for racial and social equity and social justice and racial justice. Because within that report that was generated and published in January, it talked very deliberately about one of the major causes of poverty and homelessness is institutional racism. So that's something else that we're working on now in terms of synthesizing some of the elements in that report into real policy and resources for the city of Los Angeles under this umbrella of reimagining what public safety looks like and reprioritizing some of our spending on neighborhoods that have been historically marginalized or completely neglected for decades, that still live with the after effects of institutional racism, Jim Crow, slavery, you name it. Our history, our fraught history, is baked in to some of the social conditions that people live with now, including homelessness. So I look forward to working with anyone who wants to get involved with my office on that, because we're moving full steam ahead. And that will come back to my committee as well with actual funding proposals and policy proposals. And the timing is just right for that. So I mentioned earlier at the beginning about folks who are rent burdened. Well, 58% of LA renters are rent burdened, and it's not getting any better. So we absolutely have to develop and implement a robust plan that makes it much more affordable to rent in Los Angeles. As I mentioned, it wasn't easy when I moved here in 1982, but I could scrape together enough to pay for rent and sleep on a carpeted floor with a blanket. I didn't even need a bed yet, but I could pay my rent and I could eat. It's much harder now for folks in Los Angeles than it was even then. And so we need to do something about that. We owe it to the residents of the city. I'll cover some specifics to the 13th District. Since taking office in 2013, my main priority above all else has been to produce more covenanted affordable housing and to protect the rent stabilized housing that we have now. And so we have 1,300 units of covenanted affordable housing that we've built since I've been in office, and that number is growing exponentially every day. So we have lots more in the pipeline, as I mentioned. We also have lots of bridge housing and emergency shelter in the 13th District. We are one of the leaders in terms of addressing transgender homeless individuals with one of our bridge shelters in Hollywood. We have 14,000 hours of case management and over 73,000 meals served over at one of our shelters at Schrader with 72 beds since it opened in March of last year. We're expanding the YWCA bridge housing. We have 124 beds there. And then recently, we announced an RFP for another HHH project or just permanent supportive housing project, however we get it funded, for 98 units in Echo Park. And we need to demonstrate on this city-owned, underutilized lot that we can serve multiple uses for the community and build 98 units of supportive housing. So please take a look at that. The RFP is out. Submissions are due on September 29th. And we'd love for you to take a look at that as well. It could be a case study for you all. Significantly though, we entitled Enlightenment Plaza. So I mentioned 1,300 units before in terms of affordable covenanted housing, but Enlightenment Plaza has 454 units. It's a campus of 100% permanent supportive housing. And we have pulled all of the possible levers of government to make this happen in terms of making sure it's a priority within all of the departments, reducing the red tape, just case managing every step of the way so there are no delays, getting it on the HACLA priority list for the next round. You name it, we've done it. My office takes the production of affordable and permanent supportive housing very seriously. As I mentioned, it's my priority in office, knowing that it's never, ever enough. I've worked on citywide policy as well. I'm still a big believer that the monies that the former CRA areas used to inject into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund should start going back to it. They haven't because I don't have the support of all of my colleagues for that, but I'm going to work on that again. Once upon a time, our city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was established in 2000, was very robust. And we got out of the business of supplementing that through a regular process through our CRAs years ago. And we need to, that needs to be another resource to help build permanent supportive housing and affordable housing. So we work with affordable housing developers throughout the entire approval process, including entitlements and building permits. So now more is more important than ever to highlight the current crises and bring together innovative, dignified, design thought leaders to address our homelessness crises, which I think that's what this is all about today. And it is with the help of architects, urban planners, designers, that we all work together and continue building innovative solutions to help unhoused individuals in the city of Los Angeles. On Earth Day, one example is I proposed a motion to create a report on how to support businesses continuing to have a certain percentage of their employees to continue telecommuting after the emergency order is lifted, and so that we could be informed about other initiatives to mitigate carbon emissions, reduce gridlock, and enhance urban greening. If traditional office workers could work from home one day a week or even one day every other week, it would reduce greenhouse emissions and the heat island effect in Los Angeles in a large way. But for this motion and other innovative solutions aimed at balancing equity to become a reality, our office and others will have to work collaboratively with architects, urban planners, and designers. And I know many of you are here in this virtual space this morning with us. So we'd love to work with all of you. And I encourage everyone to really follow the initiatives that get introduced from my office. They don't always get the attention that I feel they deserve or feel that they need. We have a very, very proactive approach to things with a minimal focus on picking winners and losers. My approach is more often than not very collaborative, all in, and just philosophically, I'm not wedded to the belief that for an initiative that is innovative to be successful, that someone else has to lose out. I've never been wired that way. So I invite all of you, encourage all of you to take a look at some of the initiatives that have come from this office in terms of the environment, in terms of the production of affordable and permanent supportive housing, and in terms of reducing the heat island effect, and you know, all of that. We have a very strong environmental record here, and that can be baked into citywide policy for growth and development as well. The past 3 months, actually now it's 4, of COVID-19 and pandemic have really laid bare the deficiencies in terms of the resources that people who struggle, you know, the resources that they need. And so I think that we should focus as never before from here on out, because other issues will come and go, but we need to strengthen the underpinnings of our society, our economy, while we take a look at some of the systemic issues in regard to race and public safety and all of the issues that have been raised since the murder of George Floyd. All of that has, I think, relation to all of what you all do in the design and architecture world. And those elements can be woven right into the fabric of everything we do policy-wise, and as we take a look at the future of the built environment as well. And so with that, I'll just make one more sort of push for architects and designers to get involved more in advocacy. It's not so much a NIMBY thing for me. Opposition certainly comes out of the woodwork for everything we want to do. Even if it's to develop on an empty surface lot that has a 20% set aside for low income or extremely low income residents. We get lawsuits on even something like that all the time. So I would encourage people to get involved in advocacy, and then get involved in some of the actual designs and ideas and innovative policy proposals that you can help us craft. That's what I would sort of end with in my remarks. And thank you again for this wonderful opportunity and for all of your work, Will and Alice and everyone else involved in putting this Design for Dignity conference together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have you for a couple of minutes? I think we're actually going to, good. I think we're actually going to move on into the second part and then hopefully have some time for questions for everyone afterwards. So next up, we're going to hear from some organizations and they are going to talk about what they have been up to. We're going to start with Kelly Bernard, who is the Chief Executive for the LA Metro region for AECOM, but she is also the mayor-appointed LAHSA, she is also a mayor-appointed LAHSA commissioner. And then Simon Ha, who is a managing partner of Steinberg Hart and chair of the Skid Row Housing Trust, is going to speak to us as well. Kelly, you're up first, and if both of you can keep your comments to 10 minutes or under, then we may have some time for some questions, so that would be great. Kelly, are you there? Maybe?
Let's unmute. Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I will keep the comments brief. Good morning, Councilman. It's always good to see you. As Alice mentioned, I'm one of the mayor's appointees to the LAHSA Commission. I have been on the commission, I think, for 3 years now. And prior to that, I served as Deputy Mayor of Economic Development for Mayor Garcetti. And it was only then that I became engaged in the work around ending homelessness. So it's only been 6 short years. And I say short years because although sometimes it feels like it's been a very long time, I recognize that we didn't get ourselves into the state that we're in now, the state of homelessness, overnight, and we absolutely aren't going to get ourselves out of it. And while patience is not a virtue I have ever developed, working to end homelessness has taught me that it is something that's going to require a lot of time and a lot of patience to really look at some of the root causes of this. As Alice said, I am a member of the LAHSA Commission, and as in that role, a couple of years ago, I was the co-chair of what was called the Ad Hoc Committee for Blacks Experiencing Homelessness. The councilman mentioned it briefly in his remarks, and you may have heard about it from my colleague Heidi Marston, who is the executive director of LAHSA. And you know, as we've all heard the statistics that, you know, in the city of Los Angeles, homelessness has gone up almost 16% from 2019 to 2020. And in the county, that number is 13%. And that, along with the disproportionate number of Blacks experiencing homelessness, Blacks are about 9% of the county and almost 40% of the county's homeless population. There was a real recognition that something different needed to be done. And that if we were going to end homelessness and especially those of our most vulnerable populations and Blacks being a part of that, we were going to have to do something different. And as Bill said earlier in his remarks, homelessness is just a symptom. It is not the cause of this. And so we spent a lot of time, the ad hoc committee has spent a lot of time looking at what some of those causes are. Many of those things we've talked about here over the sessions. You know, LA's inadequate housing supply, systemic racism, and income inequality are driving the inflows to homelessness. And so while, you know, it was depressing. We were all working hard. We saw the number of unhoused neighbors housed at a greater rate than ever before, and yet our numbers increased. And so while we've learned how to better house people, housing people are those who are unhoused it's not enough. What we have to do is really attack this from a systemic level. And so the ad hoc committee was created because of the recognition of this kind of intersectionality of race and homelessness. And its focus was really on looking at that intersectionality, and it was cutting edge. We did this, the committee was formed in 2017. And it was the first of its kind in the country. And it was approved in 2017 and launched in April of 2018. And the committee involved many different community members and partners across the ecosystem. We were very intentional about setting the table large, making sure that we had representatives from the faith-based community, from mental health care providers to criminal justice and law enforcement were present. Child welfare representatives were there. We also had representatives from Councilman Harris Dawson's office, supervisors Mark Ridley Thomas and Kuhl's office was there, and representatives from the mayor's office himself. And so we really wanted to set this table large and to have the experience of those with lived experience and those service and housing providers. And together, we looked at and met with researchers to talk about what we were seeing. And there were a few themes that kind of came forward very early on. And it was one that we really wanted to stress was that the current crisis and disparities are a function of systemic challenges rather than individual challenges. And they were a product of decades, as you heard from the councilman, decades of systemic issues and structural racism. And so the results, and that meant the results would have to be the same. The solutions would require sustained support and funding over an extended period of time. We were not going to get, one-time funding and think that that was going to solve issues that had been created over decades. The other key theme that came out of this was we must focus on upstream systems of care. And you've heard these things, the criminal justice system, the child welfare system. These systems that were really causing this extreme inflow. And so the committee, the ad hoc committee, focused on partnering with representatives from those systems to develop 67 recommendations about what we thought needed to be done. And now I won't go over all 67 of the recommendations so that we can have time for more dialogue and questions, but I will share with you that the recommendations really fell into 5 buckets. And those were some of the overarching, they were kind of overarching themes about making sure that the entire ecosystem, and when I talk about the ecosystem, I'm talking about the continuum of care, the coordinating system, which is the assessment tool that is used to assess and then match folks with housing, the housing providers and service providers. So all of these partners who were part of this ecosystem and who were working together to end homelessness, making sure that we were having implicit bias training, that we were looking at our own operation and trying to root out those areas of institutionalized racism, conscious and unconscious, the ones that were creating some of these disparities, and asking ourselves, all of us within the system, what can we do to make sure that the systems weren't creating more of these disparities? And so those were kind of some of the overarching recommendations or recommendations in that overarching bucket. Others included looking at the cost of living and employment as a barrier or as one of the causes to homelessness. So, supporting more living wage policies, reducing barriers to homelessness. The other bucket was the criminal justice system and reentry. What barriers were many of our unhoused neighbors facing as they were exiting the criminal justice system? Working with our elected officials to ban the box so that you reduce those barriers, ban the boxes so that if you're not familiar, it's making sure that folks didn't have to check a box, that they were at least not early in the application, the job application process, that they had come in contact with the criminal justice system. Looking at how we could remove state and federal barriers to housing for those who had records or who had interaction with the criminal justice systems. And then we also, the third bucket of recommendations were around how do we improve the foster care and child welfare system. Shamefully, many of our foster care children are exiting foster care into homelessness. And we are not, as a community, as a society, properly supporting them to make sure that they are not transitioning from the foster care into homelessness. And so what sorts of activities can we, or policies and programs can we develop, and housing options can we create to support them in that transition? And fourth was the coordinated entry system. How do we reform that coordinated entry system? I talked about, or I shared that is one of the tools that's used to match those who are experiencing homelessness with housing options and services. And so it's a very large kind of triage tool that is used. And, Bill talked about in Pasadena how they went out to the community, and that's huge. You have to go out and meet people where they are, as opposed to asking those that are unhoused to come to you. And so the coordinated entry system, the tool that we use, our caseworkers go out and we talk to our unhoused neighbors and try to get them involved. But, a lot of those questions are very personal. And so you have to build a relationship before you can even get to some of those questions. And then once you get to the questions, some of the, we found, the ad hoc committee found that it doesn't really capture some of the trauma that many people are experiencing. For example, we know that institutional racism has direct public health or health disparities or provides health challenges. There is health outcomes that are a result of years and years of experiencing racism. And that's not codified in that tool. And so those who are displaying those symptoms, they aren't getting, those health disparities that they have are not getting codified or not getting taken into consideration as they are being quote unquote scored, because the higher you score on this vulnerability index, the faster we are helping you to move into housing. And so making sure all of these tools in the coordinated entry system and the partners are rooting out some of these barriers that we had. And then lastly, the bucket of recommendations included reforming permanent housing and retention. So we talked about providing, many of you are involved in the creation and of more affordable housing, the protection of existing covenant of affordable housing, more rights around tenants so that we can prevent people from being evicted and falling into homeless. Because again, as fast as we housing, if we don't address these upstream causes and prevent people from the inflow from increasing, it's just a vicious cycle and we'll never get ahead of this. And so really the recommendations, again, these 67 recommendations looked at these 5 areas: permanent supportive housing, coordinated entry system, the foster care, criminal justice, and employment barriers, and try to identify very specific policies that we could work with many of our partners to, and then remove some of these barriers. And since the report's been released, it's been about a year or so, we're making progress both internally at LAHSA around some of the operations that LAHSA needs to improve and encouraging our partners to do so. Last week, many of you may have seen that the county supervisors passed their anti-racist policy agenda. And that is part of the work that the ad hoc committee talked about, is that looking at all of these care systems and figuring out how we can root out some of those anti-racist policies. So we were pleased to see that the county, which is a huge partner in this effort to end homelessness, was taking that step. And the city of Los Angeles has done similar work with the recent creation of civil rights commissions and human rights commissions. And so we're going to work with them and our service providers to continue to root out these barriers, to continue to work with researchers to come up with more data to talk about how we are doing. The ad hoc committee will be meeting on a regular basis. It wasn't a one-time event, and so that we meet twice a year until we are seeing steady progress on this. And so I will stop there in the interest of time, but I want to thank Alice for inviting me. I'm excited that we are having this dialogue over these 3 days. I applaud Will Wright and the entire team at AIA for this conference, and we're happy to stay on to answer questions or engage in the rest of the conversation.
Thanks, Kelly. Simon?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on this panel. It's great to hear from all the panelists so far. Just a quick introduction. My name is Simon Ha. I'm a partner at Steinberg Hart. I manage the LA office here. We're about 65 people, and we do a lot of housing, including permanent supportive housing, modular housing, market rate housing, all types of housing. So, you know, as an architect, I get to see a lot of side of how the housing gets processed and built. And then Skid Row Housing Trust, where I sit as a board chair, and which I have been involved for the last 5 or 6 years, about 6 years or so. I get to see how the system works, right? And then I'm on the downtown LA I was on the neighborhood council and been involved with the planning committee for the last 12 years and see how from the approval side, things move through. So it's interesting to be able to see things from different perspectives. So it gives me a global view of how things happen, right? But to start, I'm just gonna kind of speak for myself as a citizen and an Angelino, not as a representative of the organizations that I'm involved in. To just say, I'm fucking furious, right? This is not okay. I mean, I'm watching my city turn into the epicenter of human tragedy. It is not okay. And walking down the street and seeing rows of tents in all our streets, under the freeways, everywhere we go with medieval diseases, it's not okay, right? People are suffering and dying on the streets. I understand the process. I understand how the system works. I understand that we have to have patience, but watching George Floyd and BLM movement and all the outrage, the protests that I'm seeing, where is the outrage and anger for all the people, 64,000 people, or 66,000, 41,000 in the city? Where is the outrage and where is this sense of urgency, right? And we've been talking for years about what we need to do, and let's assess it, let's come up with plans, we have 67 different ways that we're gonna address it. But it's just not okay for us to allow people to suffer and sit on the streets and live on the streets and die on the streets until we figure it out. So I would like to see some more outrage. I would like to see people protesting in front of City Hall, right? Because this is a slow pandemic. This is a slow tragedy. And this deserves an urgency of a disaster. And we just don't see that, right? So how did we get here? If you think about it, Alice said housing is a basic human right. It is not in this country. I mean, that's just the truth, right? Constitution protects personal liberty, pursuit of happiness, but does not guarantee food, water, shelter. You have a right to exist, but you don't have a right to housing. So I think, as a society, we have to look at ourselves and say, is that okay, right? Half the world housing is built for less than $5,000. Something that I learned through my involvement through the AIA at Habitat and World Urban Forums. People are able to put the roof over their heads in most of the world, but in the US, we have to meet strict standards and housing is inherently expensive. And without subsidy, not everyone is able to attain adequate housing. So we need the regulations to be in place for safety. We don't want people getting killed because of shoddy construction, but at the same time, we have put this standard into our country where people can't build their own shelter. So we either have $500,000, affordable housing, or people have to live in tents, and then temporarily they might be able to go into a shelter here and there, right? We live in a state that is very desirable to live in. California is 49th in housing production. And I've been saying that for a while, per capita, right? I've been saying that for a while. And somebody asked last time, said, who's a 50th, right? So it turns out that Utah is behind us in terms of housing production per capita, but their population is not growing like ours, right? We have about a quarter of US homeless population in California. We're 3.5 million housing units short, right? And just looking at the numbers, LA County needs to build 517,000 affordable housing units just to meet the current demand. And the city of LA currently is going through its the housing element update for the next 8 years. And the housing needs are 460,000 units in the next 8 years to meet just the shortage. So, in the last 8 years, we've built about 80,000 units or so, and the industry is booming. All the architects are busy, contractors are busy. We see cranes everywhere, and we're at capacity in terms of how fast the things, projects can move through entitlements plan check, and also design and construction. And we have to build in the next 8 years, 5.5 times more than we did, this current cycle of the housing element. So is that even possible? Like, who's talking about these big ideas of how we're going to increase the capacity, right? We're talking about surgical approaches to making affordable housing easier so we can cut out 6 months to a year or so in a 4 to 6 year process. But nobody's talking about this glaring problem that we have in capacity, right? Do streamlining gonna allow 5.5 times more housing production in the next 8 years? I don't know. So it's just frustrating to sit here and know that there is this big problem that we have. And I think we spent so much time looking into the details of it. I feel like the big picture thinking is missing. Maybe that's where the AIA, us being architects and big thinkers, can make a difference. So, looking through, I don't know if you guys kind of understand how we got here, and a lot of the fight has been in the courts, right? We had the Jones case and these cases that you can look up yourself, but it's a series of lawsuits that have brought us to where we are today. So Jones case was a 2003 case, which was a settlement to allow people to sleep in the public spaces in Skid Row from 9 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. I lived in Skid Row around that time, a block from Midnight Mission, and we had homeless problems then. It just was not that visible, right? And then Lavon case comes along about 10 years later, and that became a civil rights issue of you can't take away people's property. And this is when we in downtown started to notice the big problem that the storm was coming, and we were raising the red flag, and CCA and all the bids in downtown were very active in trying to lobby the mayor's office to warn them about the issues that we were going to start to see, because this is what allowed all the tents, right? All the properties on the sidewalk to be allowed. And right at the beginning, we started to see tents pop up, one here, one there. People started to have couches and mattresses on the sidewalk. And the city had no mechanism to go after and clean them up. You actually had to if you saw a piece of trash on the sidewalk, you have to tag it for 72 hours. If it's still there when you come back in 3 days, then the city or the bids can pick it up and move it to a storage for 30 days. And it took forever to get the storages in place to even do this. And then after 30 days, you can destroy it. It doesn't matter if it's a piece of trash or what. If it looks like property, you can't remove it. So this is when we first started to see tents pop up. And guess what? It started to pop up everywhere, not just in downtown. Until then, it was a downtown problem. And everything was contained, but now Westwood, the Valley, everybody started to see it. That was a time when we should have had swift action, right? This is like our COVID, if we learn from COVID, we didn't take action quick enough in the US, and then we saw things get out of hand. Again, this was around the time when we should have took action, bold action, like state of emergency or something like that. That could have brought a lot of resources and quick action to solve the problem. We just let things go. State of emergency was contemplated, but it was never declared. But city council came out with this thing called 222 pledge to produce 3,300 housing units in 15 districts, right? It was a big press release, and they were talking about how we're all gonna do our part and get on this non-binding agreement to make sure that we build at least 222 units of affordable housing in our community. So there was inaction, and then there's the Mitchell case, which City Council finally acted and legislated a 60-gallon bin requirement for people living on the street. If you can't fit your property within the 60-gallon bin, then you have to put that stuff somewhere else in a storage or something. And then LAPD went out and started to enforce it. Guess what? Front page LA Times. People are not trash, right? Pictures of homeless people with a 60-gallon bin, trash bin, putting all their stuff in there. So there was another lawsuit, right? So the Mitchell case comes in, and what does the city do? They settle the lawsuit and create a sanctuary zone, no enforcement zone within Skid Row all the way to 2nd and Spring. You go down Spring Street, Main Street now, it's rows of tents. It is just unbelievable, right? And then we get to the Martin case, and then we get to the LA Alliance for Human Rights, who finally said enough is enough. We're gonna sue the city to take action. And if you guys know or have been following this, Judge Carter, who was known for his actions in Orange County, in Santa Ana, the riverbeds, it has come and he's holding court at the Alexandria building in Historic Core. And he basically pushed the city to say, hey, you have to do something. You guys let this thing happen, right? I'm not gonna wait 5 years, 10 years for you to solve this problem. I want action now. So there was an agreement that just recently happened, which the city will provide 6,000 new beds within 10 months and another 700 beds over 18 months, while the county spends $300 million over 5 years to fund services for the people. So all the people that are living around freeways within a certain distance, they all have to be moved somewhere. Right now, city is forced to take action, and it comes from a judge, right? Out of all the people that can force us to do something, it comes from a judge. So I think I want to see some outrage on this. I have more things to discuss here about what Skid Row Housing Trust is doing. We're building housing, right? We have almost 10,000 people that we housed over the last 30 years. So there are great nonprofits that are doing great work, like Amy Anderson's from one of those. And we need thousands of them doing all the work to solve this problem. But I think we just have to have this sense of urgency. So I will stop at that. I think, everything else about inequities in housing and the racial injustice that we see in housing, like 34% of the homeless people are African American when they only make up 8% of the population. There's inequities in housing that's inherently built in. So my question to the AIA is, what do we do? Where do we go from here? Do we still dabble in the projects and surgical, or do we need to start thinking big? So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. I think everybody was sort of fired up by you, and thank you for that. We're going to take questions actually until about 10:15. But the more we streamline, more the panelists streamline their answers, the more questions we can take. So I'm just going to ask if you can try to keep your answers to 1 minute or less. That would be great. Probably not possible, but let's try. Just looking for somebody to raise their hand. I don't actually know how to figure out.
Alice, I can help you out. So we'll help move it along to get it going pretty quick. So we first have a question from Josh. Josh, if you can unmute yourself, and please, everybody, we just want to use the raise hand. So please raise your hand and get ready to be queued up after Josh.
Hey everyone, thanks for the panel conversation. Besides Simon's call to outrage and going back to last Thursday's call for radical ideas, my question for the panelists is, what is the most radical idea you have in regards to ending homelessness, and how can the architecture community help you achieve this?
Who would like to take that one on?
Maybe I'll just touch on it really quick. So I think, it's not a radical idea. It's an idea that is instilled in most of, human society, which is housing is a human right, right? I think we all must agree that it's unacceptable as a society to allow our citizens to die on the streets. So we all must fight, scream, protest, and demand that housing is a human right. And if we can believe that, then the policies will follow and the money will follow, right? And we will change how we see this problem of housing inequity. And it's because housing is something you earn in this country through the hard work. It doesn't address the inequities that are built in it, right? We subsidize, biggest subsidy that we give out is the homeowner's mortgage insurance deduction, right? Can we think about, if we say housing is a human right, how does that then change our policies of how we fund things? Instead of dropping 1,000 place-based, Section 8 vouchers to LA, can we get more? I don't know. So I think we just have to think big in that way.
Alice, can I chime in for a second? Let's see, I would say that one solution is to not be so focused on developing new construction, but to even do things like acquire single family homes, use them to house the lower acuity folks in a shared housing arrangement. You can do it much faster, or existing apartment buildings, use them to house lower acuity individuals. And then in order to get to scale, I think we have to engage the for-profit developers, and that would be incentives, super density bonuses, things like that, to get them to voluntarily build deed-restricted, long-term deed-restricted affordable housing.
Maybe to build on what Bill's saying, I would suggest getting rid of the applicability of CEQA to any housing development, especially if it has a set aside for affordable housing. CEQA has been an incredible hindrance to housing development in the state.
This is Matthew. I have a question.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Go ahead.
So what the biggest elephant in the room in California is Prop 13, is it not? It's created the largest mindset of people's individual home as their right to appreciation and value. How do you do that and at the same time try to develop more housing?
Who'd like to take that one on?
And if nobody's taking it on, it's a real speaks volumes. That means that we aren't willing to recognize Prop 13 is the biggest value. And we cannot separate our own value of our own home against our community.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of policies in the state and in the country that reinforce that elevation of home ownership and the single family home in particular, not just Prop 13.
Well, it's the most racist policy since 1978. I would say education, we went from #1 to the lowest in education. If that isn't racist, I don't know what is.
I agree. I mean, we need Prop 13 reform, right? We've been talking about CEQA reform, Prop 13 reform, and looking at ways to fundamentally change our system. And this has been a topic of discussion for, I don't know, at least 10, 12 years that I've been involved through Central City Association in downtown here. So this is nothing new. I think what we need is, we need some real leadership. We need some balls in our politicians, because these are things that will get them not elected anymore, right? You bring up these reforms and these become the third rail. So, yes, we need to do something. I completely agree. How we're going to do it, who's going to do it, is really the question here, and something that hasn't been answered, because anybody you put in that tries to bring that up is no longer in the office.
And the Prop 13 beneficiaries are older and if not whiter, I believe.
Yeah, I think if you owned a home for a long time in the state of California, there's no incentive for you to move, because your taxes are capped. And so,
No, I don't know if you know this, but you can sell your home over the age of 72 and buy a home and not pay taxes any higher than the home you sold in California under Prop 13.
Yeah, and and there's some good sides and bad sides too, right? So let's say somebody who owned a home for a long time, they're retired and they're on a fixed income. If we remove Prop 13, and then like my parents, their property taxes will go up, but their income is limited. The only way to get out of it would be they would have to sell their house. And maybe that's how the housing market should work, right? That you sell and then you downsize. But I think that creates a lot of havoc as well. So, I totally agree. But I'm pivoting a little bit. One thing that we've been discussing a lot is, is a low-income housing tax credit system the best system to produce housing? And because I work a lot on the private side as well, that we're producing about the same scale of housing at about half the price on the private side versus the public side, right? And if you look at how the private side works, it's all based on efficiency, right? You have to be efficient in the way you design, you construct, and even the scale of the projects has to be efficient enough to take advantage of the economies of scale. So most of the developers won't touch things that are less than 150 to 200 units, because it's much more expensive to operate. In the light tech or subsidized housing, most of the projects are anywhere from 60 to 100 units, which is very inefficient to build. And the way that we subsidize it is, if you look at HHH, right? Let's say 6,000 units that HHH is going to produce. That puts in about $200,000 per unit into the project, and then the rest of the money has to come from private participation. And with that system is just inherently inefficient, because now you have to go out and get like 6 to 10 different lenders to come into the project and invest in it, right? And then you have to match the rent subsidy to the number of units. So as a developer, there's no incentive, nonprofit developer, there's no incentive to get 2 extra units to house 2 extra people, because now you have to go find 2 extra vouchers to match that. So you kind of get set at, okay, we're just gonna do 80 units and I'm gonna go find 80 vouchers. I ask my real estate director and say, can we get 5 more units? Oh no, we don't have the vouchers to match for that. Even though we can build it, we're not building it because everything has to match. So it is inherently built to be inefficient in the way that it's built, it's delivered, and it's realized, right? So that's, in a nutshell, you know, we've been discussing about how do we scale that up so that we're not doing.
Simon, I'm sorry. I'm gonna.
Sorry.
Yes, Simon, sorry.
Move on. Yeah, let's take a question from Martha Criley.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm a recent graduate, and I just wanted to say thanks, Simon, for sort of firing us up, because that's sort of the attitude that I've been waiting for since the beginning of the conference. It's really powerful to hear that you're frustrated, and I think a lot of people are frustrated, but that passion is really inspiring to see. I think one of the comments mentioned, what are we showing to like future generations? I'm a millennial, and I think, you know, I'm right at the tail end of, you know, right as I was graduating, seeing some of the younger students come up, and, you know, they're pissed off, they're frustrated at the perceived apathy, but I think it's not apathy, it's just attempted professionalism in a way, which got me thinking of a recent class I had with Dana Cuff, and she talked about there are 2 ways to change things. You can work within a system, or you can work outside of it. And I feel like that's really the dichotomy that I've been struggling with recently, just seeing like the activism and the attempts at change being made. One is like the idea of the professional, which I feel like is what this conference has been about. Very composed, talking about policy and how things are being changed in policy, and then the role of the activist working outside the system, being fired up, being angry, trying to like break the system down and rebuild it in a better way. But I feel like at the same time, we are all both of those people. So we're trying to be 2 things at the same time. We're trying to be both the activist and the professional. And I'm curious about your thoughts. Maybe you could speak to some of the younger, those of us who are younger, who are trying to be both acting within a system because that seems to be the only way to get things done, while also being pissed off, both the activist and the professional. How do you reconcile those 2 things? How do you remain professional and try to work within a system that seems to be so broken and challenge these odds that are so seemingly insurmountable? So that's my question.
If I could chime in.
Go ahead, Bill. You have 60 seconds. And
Okay. I would say that you could broaden the system that you work within. I think Corbusier was wrong when he said, you know, give me architecture or give me revolution. Design doesn't make the world go round. Money makes the world go round. Policies make the world go round. And I think, like Natasha from the first day, she broadened her field. She didn't stay in just the design lane. Design is important. It's very important, but it doesn't make the world go round. And so, you know, there's an opportunity to get outside your lane and to broaden your lane to make a bigger impact.
Thank you. Question from Mike Neely.
Yes, very quickly. One of the things that I've been just kind of listening to, and we've done a lot of talk about permanent supportive housing And as I know permanent supportive housing, it is a very expensive form of housing that only serves a very limited number of people. I think about 25% of the population that is currently homeless would be eligible for permanent supportive housing. So my question is, with this kind of emphasis on permanent supportive housing, are we inadvertently choking off our ability to produce affordable housing for many, many more people? If I can build 2 units for the price of one supportive housing unit, would it not make sense to create those 2 units whereby we can house many, many more people and still achieve the goal of taking those that are most vulnerable off the street? So whoever wants to take that on.
I guess I would just, I think you raise a really good point, right? Which is that people experiencing homelessness are experiencing homelessness for a wide variety of reasons. Some have disabilities that include health disabilities, mental health disabilities, addiction issues, right? And those are the people who benefit from permanent supportive housing. But as has been highlighted throughout today's session, and I'm sure the earlier sessions, that housing affordability is really at the crux of what's leading to homelessness for a lot of families, a lot of individuals. So just so different interventions are key, right? So whether that is a rental subsidy for someone to move into an existing unit, more rent restricted units is also key. Kind of again behind that is I think a need, and I know this can feel frustrating because when new units get built, they're often very expensive, but it is helpful to expand the supply of units generally, because then that person with a voucher is able to find a unit where they can live, you know, stably and affordably. So, you know, I guess I would just highlight that a couple of policies the city has put in place over the past couple of years are the transit-oriented communities guidelines, which is facilitating what Bill was talking about, incentives for building on-site affordable housing, which include density bonuses or parking restrictions, because expanding that supply of affordable units is essential to helping the broad array of people's experience of homelessness.
But I would just add that there's, subsidizing, creating affordable housing through subsidies is only one way to produce affordable housing. I think what we're all recognizing, there's not enough subsidies to subsidize our way out of the affordable housing crisis. So, but you can also require it with programs like ordinances like inclusionary housing, and you also could incentivize it. So subsidizing it is only one way, and it is limited. When we run into these struggles, how about this population versus that population? Because there's not enough of it. But we can do more on the requiring of affordable housing and incentivizing affordable housing.
Thank you.
But nobody's addressed the question directly. Have we hindered our ability to be able to produce the affordable housing we're talking about because of the fact that we're devoting so much time, energy, resources to building housing that will only serve about 25% of the people that are out on the street now? That's the question. And should we look at a new strategy, or should we look at maybe we've got the wrong solution for the wrong problem? Maybe we need to get the right solution for the right problem.
Amy, do you want to finish up to answer that?
I would just say no. We're promoting the development of affordable housing in lots of different ways. There's affordable housing being built, but in the traditional subsidized way. But there's also more units being built, certainly in Los Angeles than ever before, through these incentive mechanisms, whether it's density bonus, TOC, affordable housing linkage fee.
Okay. I think Corinne's going to say a couple words. We're going to have to take a break right now. Corinne, do you want to?
Yeah, so up next we have a few videos from Craig Shimahara and Egan Simon Architects. So if you guys want to stick around for that, Craig is going to join us now. But if you need to stretch your legs, it's time to do it because we're still going for another good 45 minutes or so.
Thanks,
Craig?
Corinne. Thanks,
Yep.
Corinne. Really appreciate it. The fascinating conversation, Alice and everyone. We're going to be pivoting now as a group. We're going to be talking about engaging cultural narratives. And I think everyone on this call is a storyteller to a certain degree, whether you're designing a building or writing a book. We're telling stories. And stories move and they're powerful. I think the broadest patterns of history are in ways shaped by stories. Everyone on this call should think about themselves as a storyteller and keep these things in mind as we move to the next section. Who is the audience? What is the story? What is the hook to that story? And what are your goals? My wife and I are producing a nonprofit feature documentary entitled Architecture of Hope. It will showcase the architectural response to homelessness in Los Angeles. And we want to get the story right, and we'd love your help. You can reach out to us on the website, architectureofhope.org. You can support and engage on the Facebook page, Architecture of Hope Film. And then we have a virtual meetup at 12 o'clock after the conference. Just go to the WUVA community section and you can get the Vimeo link. For now, I will share the trailer that we've shown for the last couple of days and hope to talk to you soon.
My eviction began centuries ago with chains that in time hid themselves as rebar, stiffening the foundations, freeways, walls, ceilings, and doors which surround me, but offer only to shade the sidewalk where my laundry and television now wait, like fatherless children. Now I measure the darkness. I study each footstep or whisper. Where you sleeping tonight, baby? My clothes sag and soil. My weight drops quickly, like your eyes as you rush past me. Like my eyes as I remember rushing past another. Now I'm the one who's cold and alone, bleeding in the street. How do I root out these chains which still hold fast beneath immaculate backyards that push me away? How do I get off the street with blurred eyes and a pain in my neck? Show me how to build a home I can half afford. I want to warm, I move to mend. Help me find heart and hope to rise above pavement and stone. How do I shelter at home?
Thank you, and we hope to see you all at the WUVA event, 12 o'clock. Thanks, Corinne.
Thanks, Craig. Okay, and now I'm going to hand it off to John Egan, who is going to share a video as well.
Hi, so we just recently, this last week, finished a new bridge housing project for 85 beds for women in Sylmar. And we wanted to share with everybody, you know, the process and impact of that. And so we created a short video. I did want to mention in relation to the Prop 13 comment that was made, systemic change really occurs through communication at this point. And the more communication that we have on the topic of homelessness, I think really is what's going to create this, you know, kind of seismic shift that we're looking for. So in that regards, we put together a video and I'm going to show you the first minute of it. I believe Will Wright already sent out a link with the video itself, and then we're going to be available later in the conference if you stay on the conference line to take any questions associated to the Arroyo. So with that, I'll share my screen. John Egan, partner in Egan Simon Architecture, and I'd like to welcome you to Los Angeles County's newest women's bridge housing called the Arroyo. Los Angeles is in a housing crisis, and our efforts have not been significant enough to meet the needs of the people. The Arroyo provides 85 beds for women and is one solution that is moving in the right direction. And this is how it all came together.
I'm Lance Simon, Design Principal at Egan Simon Architecture. I'm a member of NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects, and I'm also the board chairman at Shelter Partnership. One of the most valuable assets that we have, particularly in Southern California, is we have a vast number of underutilized and obsolete buildings that can be used for housing. This is a great example. This was a former California armory, and it was being used temporarily for winter shelters. And when they approached us, they said, we want to make it a year-round temporary facility. And then as the project evolved, it became evident that we needed a permanent facility to handle all of the people that are constantly experiencing homelessness.
Thanks, John.
There you go.
Yeah, so just to reiterate what John said, if you've watched the video, or if you want to learn more about the project or the video, hang around after 11 o'clock, and John and his team will be on to address any questions.
Great, and thank you, Craig, John, and Lance also. So we're just going to move into part 3 now, which is titled The Arts, the Narratives, and How We Hear. We have 3 panelists with us. Ivy Pechota, who's a novelist. She's the author of Wonder Valley, and she teaches creative writing in Skid Row. We have Haik Mokmarian, who is a community organizer and advocate for equitable access to the arts here in LA. And we have Doug Smith, who is a journalist with the LA Times. We've been reading his pieces on homelessness for years now. So Ivy, I'm gonna start with you.
Thanks, Alice. Thanks for having me. Before I introduce myself, I have to say that I do work with the next speaker, Haik, and everything I have to say and my entire involvement with homelessness is due to him. So I really owe him a lot, and it's sort of humbling to be on the same panel with him. And you know, I feel a little disingenuous speaking before him, but it has to be said. My name is Ivy Pechota, and I'm a novelist. My novel, Wonder Valley, was set both in Skid Row and in 29 Palms. It was a direct result of my experience teaching creative writing in a studio downtown. A lot of my novels have to do with shining a light into underserved communities. I think fiction is a really important way to examine people whose lives might not necessarily be considered suitable for a conventional storytelling. I think fiction is a really important tool we have for generating empathy among people who may or may not look at, you know, the larger world as opposed to the world that they sort of operate in. I think I've been teaching in Skid Row for 7 years on and off. And I have to say that when I first arrived in the studio, I came and I brought with me a a series of conventional attitudes that are probably not that far away from the way the average person thinks of homelessness. You know, my experience of homelessness, having grown up in New York, was just what you would see on the subway, or you know, on television. And those attitudes were debunked the second I sat down to teach. The you know, crew of people assembled in the workshop were so far removed from anything I had imagined that I would encounter. Some of them were college students, actually in college, who were homeless at the time. Two of them, you know, were attending Los Angeles Community College. A great number of the participants and the artists were, and still are, college graduates and people who have advanced degrees and who are professional artists. And, you know, some people were incredibly successful in their fields, you know, and so that, you know, idea that the homelessness we see on television or read about in books, and please, every book about, you know, novel about homeless community comes across my desk to vet, and the majority of them are just absolutely, you know, entrenched in this very narrow-minded vision of what homelessness is. So, you know, within an hour of teaching creative writing, I was able to reframe my thinking of, you know, the community in Skid Row, and to immediately think of it as a community, not as, you know, a assortment of people brought together by the unifying factor of dealing with extreme poverty or, you know, homelessness. So after teaching in the studio for a while, I began to write a novel, and, you know, it was never my intention to write about Skid Row. It's something I approached with a great deal of caution, which I will speak about in a moment. But in beginning to write Wonder Valley, which does not start in Skid Row, it starts in the desert in 29 Palms. The narrative starts in Skid Row, but the story begins before. It's in two time periods. I realized that I had harbored a much greater prejudicial attitude that I had to overcome, and my writing was really a way through that, which is, you know, I think a lot of people approach homelessness as a fixed point, and this is where narrative comes in really crucially in my way of thinking. You know, a narrative, as a creative writing instructor and a novelist, is something that has a beginning, middle, and an end. And one of the things I think a lot of people, at least the people I speak to about my work and my experience teaching downtown, is that people will look at the moment of teaching as that's the only moment. You have the students, they come in, or the artists, I shouldn't call them students, they're artists, they're more talented than I am, many of them. And this is a story that began way before the present condition that, you know, a person finds themselves in. And more importantly, it's a story that continues. Narrative has a forward drive. It has a resolution. It has a forward momentum. So narrative for me is a really great tool for examining something, you know, whether it's homelessness or whatever sort of crisis point people find themselves in. So I had to look at the characters in my book, who are loosely inspired by people I knew and artists in the studio. And the more important moment to me was not the moment in which I encountered them, or the moment in which we encountered them in the story, but it was all the moments that led up to the moment we meet, and all the moments that continue. So narrative is this essential way, I think, of looking at, I hate to use the word problem, because a problem sounds like something that is a negative, but it's an essential way of framing an issue. So in writing Wonder Valley, I had to imagine that although there's this place where people are not faring as well as, you know, you would like, the story is going to move forward. We're in a continuum. So I think narrative is just this absolutely essential way to, you know, frame an issue. And narrative is also a really great thing for teaching and helping, and, you know, takes me out of the sort of savior position of teaching the workshop and thinking, you know, I'm going to brighten somebody's day. A narrative is something that you can give to any human being, be it, you know, from a child to an adult, that is going to create an impetus to keep moving. I learned, it's a total cliche, and it's one that I've, you know, heard myself say a million times, but in every cliche, there is more than a kernel of truth, that I learned more from the people I met in the workshop than they learned from me, but it is 100% true. And one of the most important things I learned, and I've told the story a gazillion times, and I cannot for the life of me, and I'm so ashamed, I should look back at my notes, remember who told me. But, you know, in writing about a community such as the one in Skid Row, you have to proceed with caution. And you have to be careful. I'm an outsider, so I write everything from an outsider's perspective. Nobody in my book is a long-term resident of Skid Row. In fact, people come and go and experience it much as I did in various different ways. But the thing that one of the artists told me is that sometimes for many people you meet, their story is the only thing that belongs to them properly. Their narrative is the only thing they control in their lives. That, you know, isn't a question of, you know, applying to the city or getting permission or, you know, getting your whatever SSI or any. So the narrative is the sole possession that cannot be taken away. And it's very, very, very important as an artist or a storyteller to respect that. The narrative can never belong to me. I have to create my own narrative around it and put myself in the position of my own, of the storyteller. So no one's story can be taken away. And I think that's a really, really important issue for many artists who are looking to engage with the community, because it's so easy to take advantage of, you know, the story that seems like ripe for exploitation or elevation into fiction. And for that reason, I think it's really, really important as a teacher of creative writing to use the idea of the ownership of narrative as a great teaching tool and an empowerment tool, because these are not our stories to tell. There are stories to learn from, there are stories to share, but you know, as a person who wrote a novel set in Skid Row, I even now find myself having to be very careful about how much of the story is my own and how much I really owe to, you know, the enormously talented and much more experienced group of people who, you know, came together in the writing workshop. Art is always a really great way to explore a community, you know, and as a writer of fiction, and especially fiction that's crime fiction, you know, a crisis is a great way to bring a community together. But writing about Skid Row, I didn't really need that, because it's a community that has band together over crisis over and over and over again. And, you know, I was just absolutely shocked that I never had to look for story or plot or what happened next, because the, you know, a book is meant to show the fissures and the strengths of any given community. So it was all there and available. And it was just my job as a storyteller to figure out how to navigate a path between the various stories that I encountered, but really to honor the fact that nobody's story begins, for the most part, in Skid Row. They begin before we get there. And my goal as a storyteller was to let my readers know that the story continues on afterwards, and things change and evolve, and to sort of inform my readers and, you know, people listening in or who read about the book or who read about Skid Row, that narrative it is forward momentum. It is something that is not, you know, stuck in the given point in which we tune in. These are stories that progress into the future, and it is our job to keep pushing forward into the future with, you know, the next development. So that's sort of my philosophy as an artist or a writer who does the sort of somewhat challenging and some morally complex work of sort of, you know, it keeps me up at night of, you know, right. My more recent book is about prostitution in LA. So it's sort of the same issue whose stories we have the right to tell. But, you know, as long as we use narrative as a way to frame a future for everyone, not just our fictional characters, I think it's a really, really positive force. So that's my sort of vision about writing in the community. And I'm sure Hike will have a lot more to say on arts in Skid Row. And I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to share this with you all.
Thanks, Ivy. Hike, where are you? Are you there?
I'm right here.
There you are.
Yeah, thank you all. It's good to be part of this conversation, and thank you, Ivy. Thank you, Alice, everyone. I wear a couple of hats, and so like a few different hats. It's probably a lot of us do, but the two main ones that I like are relevant for today are that I do run one particular community space in Skid Row, but also I'm part of a number of different initiatives, both in Skid Row and beyond. I'm on the LA County's advisory committee for cultural equity, so that's sort of like arts advocacy as a as a human right. And also I am very much a tenants' rights organizer in LA, specifically in Glendale, but originally in Los Angeles, very much so. And so it's hard to actually keep the arts advocate hat on right now, because a lot of what has been talked earlier is very much amazing things to build on from a tenants' rights organizer perspective. So I'll try to weave those things into each other a bit. As far as the importance to just kind of one also, I think it's so nice to talk in an audience where some things don't need to be proven, like the importance of arts and cultural component to our lives as human beings. But I'd like to break down a little bit what that means. So we talk a lot about housing as a human right. I'd like to add to it education as a human right, healthcare as a human right, and arts and cultural access as a human right. And why arts and cultural access, although it might be obvious to some of us, I think it's worth talking about a bit. In this conference alone, there has been all these conversations about the importance of creativity, the importance of innovation, and those are all arts and cultural, tools. Arts and culture, explicitly as well, and how those are the tools to really get to a society we want to live in. Now, historically, we know that access to innovation and creativity is very rooted in access to resources for that, or spaces for that, and historically and presently, it's just deeply, deeply unequal across racial lines, across social lines, across class lines. And so, and also historically, we know that people, time and again, people closest to inequity problems are closest to the solutions. And so not investing robustly in arts and cultural access as a human right is inherently a racist position, a sexist position, a classist position that's anti-poor position. So just kind of like tie those things together. There's a reason why a lot of fields, I don't know the statistics, but I would imagine, the architecture field is probably a lot more disproportionately white than the actual breakout the population. I don't want to throw statistics I don't know specifically, but across the professional world, we know it's the case overwhelmingly. And the arts and cultural spaces being a human right are key to this. We don't live in boxes, we live in communities that have public spaces, that have community spaces, social spaces, spaces that should be representative of the people that live in those communities and controlled by people that live in those communities. For Skid Row, just to kind of like bring it home, it is a majority Black community and a diverse community of color and a really poor community. And yeah, ideally, that would mean that all the different leadership positions and all the decision-making positions and control would be in the hands of residents of Skid Row, and definitely both Black folks and poor and extremely poor folks. And that's not reflected in the boardrooms, that's not reflected anywhere in the major entities that drive the narrative for Skid Row currently. I also did want to, because arts is so tied to language and narrative, that's sort of like, that's how Alice started this, break down a little bit the human right. We say this, housing as a human right, but kind of dig a little deeper, and what does it really mean? If something is a human right, to just be very clear that it means that accessibility to it for everyone is decommodified. That means that there's public resources that are so vast, and I'm talking about, for instance, with housing, vast investment in public housing and space around it, sustainability of it, long-term sustainability of it, that we actually can call it a human right. I think someone else mentioned, Simon mentioned earlier, yeah, we don't have it as a human right in this country currently. And if we are allowing ourselves, taking the responsibility to aspire for it as a human right, it comes with the responsibility of actually talking about what it means for it to be a human right and how do we work towards that. The other term that I wanted to just unpack a little bit is the word tenant. And I thought I heard some great conversation about the rent burden tendencies. I'm so glad that now I don't need to give any numbers. We already heard the numbers. We know that the numbers so far outpace the need, or rather the number of needed units so far outpace anything that we can build, that as a number of people said, we can never build our way out of it. So what are the solutions then, right, to this? And I would argue that the solutions are to articulate, further articulate and clarify it, come together as a collective voice to push for real tenants' rights protections and for massive reinvestment in public housing. And we are in a good moment for it, because when we, those of us that hopefully are able to look at what it means, for instance, to defund the police, we know that it is about reinvestment. It is about where the money goes when it's taken from somewhere else. How do we make sure that we make it clear that subsidies for developers, and especially subsidies for private landlords, especially large private landlords, could be completely taken out and put into massive investment in the type of housing that actually addresses needs. Someone else mentioned about vacancies. There's 4 vacancies. I forget the stat, but there's a lot more vacant homes than there are people who are unhoused. The ways to shift that attention is to shift narratives. And I think I know that artists and creative folks, storytellers, as all of you have been called to see yourselves as, are able to do that. And when we band together, we are able to do this kind of things. I am curious to see, a group like, a lot of architects coming together and using your collective voice, not to step away from your role as architects, but to also step into collectively into role of loudly advocating and demanding this kind of changes in every room that you're in, again, collectively. Yes, coming up with innovative ways of using that voice, not only focusing your innovation on your professional tools that you're working with, but tapping into your place as a human being in society that is becoming deeper and deeper in its inequalities. Another thing that I would want to suggest, and sort of like, again, straggling a couple of different hats, when this very well-placed, I believe, outrage is felt, and I heard this, this is something that a lot of people resonated with, how to direct it. And I would encourage anyone and everyone to make a point of joining your local community organizing group. In Los Angeles, a lot of you are in Los Angeles, join your local Los Angeles Tenants Union, your Los Angeles Tenants Union local. Don't worry, it's not, you don't ever have all of a sudden have to commit 40 hours to it a week or anything like that. Just being there and seeing what you can contribute, listening, but also like, okay, I can take 2 hours. Join, go to meetings of the Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. They have public meetings, and see how you can be part of that movement. And, we are in a great place because these intersections are there, and creativity is so necessary. One last thing that I wanted to touch on, I know we're like running short on time. I was taking notes like all over. I'm like, I could talk for an hour, but one last thing I wanted to just really drive home is whenever talking about homelessness, let's make sure to always recognize that homelessness never happens in a vacuum. It's been said in different ways. I know that's so important to have this clarity, and so I want to finish with one other definition. The Los Angeles Tenants Union defines tenant as anyone who is not in control of their own housing. That would be anyone who is unhoused, and anyone who is housed but has housing precarity because they're rent burdened or not, but are a renter. But just focusing on unhoused folks and rent burdened tenants alone, again, someone has brought out the stats, for Los Angeles, the numbers are staggering. We're going into like 1 million or plus people or households that are rent burdened, housed or unhoused, and making sure that we see this together, and see it as one of the same issue. If we look at homelessness separately, it is actually dehumanizing and racist way of looking at the issue. And so I said that was the last thing. I just wanted another shift in narrative that and I'll finish with this, is how do we define this crisis? And the main thing has been homelessness crisis early on, then now a lot of people are using housing crisis, but really this is a tenants' rights crisis. It's the lack of real policies that protect tenants from fear, from disenfranchisement, and protects tenants' stability in their housing. Someone said earlier at the beginning, the issue goes away, something like that, when someone becomes housed, but that's not true. The issue goes away when you're fully in control of your housing. And I'm not saying the traditional solution has been home ownership, but what if we just move our, look to other places and move our perspective a little bit and say, hey, what about public housing? What about investment in housing as a human right? So it's a tenants' rights crisis. Anytime anyone tells you it's a housing or homelessness crisis, they are leaving out people out of it. They're saying you need to build house as opposed to you need to actually address people's needs. And again, shift in narrative, shift in language, very much tied to how our access to creativity and arts are distributed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heike. Doug, there you are. You're muted. There you go.
Thanks for having me. I think I'd like to take Simon's lead and speak not as a journalist really, but as an Angelino. And I certainly can't match his passion, but I think the advantage I have over him is that my time frame is probably twice as long as his. The Los Angeles that I grew up in was a place that had these kind of random iconic high spots like City Hall, Barnsdall Park, General Hospital, and I would include the LA Times building, which obviously means a lot to me personally. And then between that was this huge gray area where people lived. And I think that sort of, did I mention the Brown Derby? Some of these things were wacky, but they were iconic, and they established a picture of Los Angeles for the rest of the world. And I think I see the permanent supportive housing that's being built in that context still. I mean, Disney Hall being sort of just visually one of the most extreme examples of it. But the people who are building this housing, because of their concern about NIMBYism, they're trying to make it the best thing on the block or in the area. And I mean, I think it's provided some interesting buildings. When I drive around Los Angeles now, I almost feel like I can pick out a permanent supportive housing building because it's just one of the nicest things in the area. But the challenge that I want to bring up, and I want to kind of carry this back to design, is that that vast gray area where people live is, in my view, redesigning itself right now. And I think if I drive around South LA a lot, and I see what's an emergence of duplex or triplex buildings that are essentially just big boxes that are replacing either one house or two house. And I'm doing some reporting now in the San Fernando Valley, and many single family homes are being divided up into some form of shared living, independent living, or sober living environments. There are various names for them. They're all kind of under the radar. They're not in anybody's plan. And after 4 years of covering homelessness, I'm starting to see the tent camps around the city in that same context. These are people who are responding to a city that has a growing population, a widening wealth and income gap, extremely high housing values, and they're making a rational decision to find a way to live. And so I think these tents are homes. And to riff a little bit on what the councilman said, when I was young and ambitious in the mid 60s, I wasn't satisfied with college, so I just dropped out and got a minimum wage job, and the minimum wage then was in the $2 range, I think. And I was able to support myself, get an apartment, and actually sort of start my life. I just don't think that's anywhere possible today for anybody. And I think it's because the city itself is not keeping up with what's happening to the city. I don't have any idea now. I don't have a vision of where we're headed as a city. I travel around. I don't know what what our city is going to look like in 10 years with the conditions that exist here. I think transit-oriented development is an interesting idea, and maybe that's where we're headed, but it has not been articulated in a way that is convincing to me. And I think a lot of NIMBYism is a result of people not being able to visualize where we're headed. What's the design of this city that we're all going to be living in? So I guess I'm going to end it with that. That's what I want to know. I want to know the architectural design of the city, living with the forces it has.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. We can take a couple of questions before we wrap up. We have gone way past our allotted time for this section, but that's okay. Does anybody have a question that they want to ask with a raised hand?
I don't see anybody right now.
Okay, well, in that case, I just want to invite Michael and Wade, if you both want to say just a couple of brief words in terms of summing up, that's great. And then if anybody does have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll just work it in. Michael, do you want to start? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. We began 3 sessions ago, and we had Natasha Hicks sort of set a scene about liberating, what were the words she used? Imagination and liberation, liberated relationships, and a notion of jazz. I think today we end up with Doug saying, what does this city look like? Describe Los Angeles and the entire community of people, including the people who Doug says are living, if not housed, in their tents on the street. When Simon spoke earlier and said he was fucking annoyed and really pissed off, and then articulated sort of the reasons for that, it brings us back to sort of what is the skill set of architects. I think to make architecture and to make an impact on any particular site, we have to be at some level, whether it's expressed and really outwardly manifest, outraged about what is not there, the contradictions and paradoxes in front of us on any site. And we also have to be completely sort of engaged and massively, actually endlessly optimistic. The ability to care in these 3 days, I mean, my mind is sort of exploding, feeling both adequate and extremely inadequate. And I think the important skill, and again, I think it's a skill of being an architect, is to carry passionately, simultaneously opposing and contradictory thoughts and know that it's okay. To know that our situation is outrageous and impossible, and to be hopeful, because if we're not hopeful about it, we ain't gonna do nothing. I think we've explored, we've had city leaders telling us, importantly, these are the good things that are happening, and they take time. And on one hand, we say patience is important, and then Natasha says that's a word that she thinks is a dangerous and bad word. Both of those thoughts, I think, are necessary to have. And I just want to thank everybody. I would actually start with the staff and all of the speakers and the big chunk of the community who showed up for 3 days. You know, one of the things I said at the beginning of day one was that Los Angeles is either a major laboratory or the major laboratory to be exploring issues of housing and houselessness. And I think maybe other communities could muster together a group like this over 3 days and have such wide-ranging across-the-board conversation. If so, all power to them. I'm not sure so many could. A sense of just one or two other thoughts. Somebody mentioned, Corinne, who is also a critical member, a new member of our staff at the AAA, as sort of, I think, as somebody new to architecture, commented about the niceness of people's tone. I think that I think that our community is unusually collegial. I've heard people from outside of Los Angeles say that about us. In a profession where I think jealousy and envy and insecurity, as well as confidence, is all part of the deal. It comes with being an architect. I think we're kind and respectful. I think that one of the great things and challenging things about being part of this community is it's always heartening and discouraging to see how talented everybody is and the level of passion and commitment. And so with that, I just, those are sort of my a few thoughts as we approach the conclusion.
Wade.
Well, as always, following Michael is daunting, and I'm not up to the challenge. But I will say that you know, our real problem is not homelessness, but the rupture of the social contract between us all, and we have let each other down. We're at the same time we're trying. We're going upstream, but there's a lot of good things going on by a lot of people, and that gives us hope. Our lack of progress is daunting and disheartening, but we're doing what we can, and I hope we can start building more housing. We're housing more people than are falling into homelessness, and that's our goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Wade. I'm just going to add very briefly that, you know, I think it's interesting because I think Michael is very right that architects, we as individuals and as a group, we do kind of straddle that fence. We're all very passionate people, I think, who really want to set fire to the world the way Simon sort of expressed. but at the same time, we're trained to do certain things and to do them in a certain way. And so in a way, we're very well equipped to kind of deal with challenges because we can actually do them from both within and without. I think this gets back to what Martha Kiley, the, I think, recent UCLA grad perhaps, was talking about, how we operate at both of those levels. And I think it's really important to kind of go back and revisit that, each of us individually, as well as within our work, no matter what we do. And I think that it's really interesting to start to really understand the kind of network of forces that really have to come together to tackle this problem, whether it's through writing fiction or advocating for equitable housing and access to space, any of those things. And so I would just, you know, say that for myself, I'm coming back from, or I'm coming out of these 3 days, having learned a tremendous amount and kind of overwhelmed by the amount of information out there, but I'm just going to tell myself to really focus again on what it is that I can do, and to sort of try to harness that into some sort of a meaningful force that will join with all of your forces, and hopefully we can sort of make that difference. So I really appreciated Simon's anger today. I think it's really well placed and necessary. I think we all have that anger. And we just have to channel it in a positive way. Last night, I discovered this website that somebody sent me. Maybe some of you know it, but it's called reasonstobecheerful.world. If you don't know that website, please go and check it out, because it is what it is. It's actually a website that was developed by David Byrne. He actually does a lot of the writing on the website, but he's, he and his group are talking about issues through their writing and through photography, all different sorts of, excuse me, issues and challenges, but always in the kind of spirit of finding solutions. And that's what we're here to do. So reasonstobecheerful.world, and I will leave you all with that. So thank you very much. Will, I don't know if you have any last words, but
yeah, thank you, Alice. And thank you, Wade and Michael, for bringing us together for the last 3 days. I just want to connect with everyone that's led or participated in one of the breakout discussions. Please connect with me directly. We have a lot of work to do together. I'm going to reassemble each of those working groups, and we're going to move forward on your action items. And you'll be, connecting me with me directly on that. Before we end the program today, I just want to give a big thank you to Corrine, to Carlo, to Tibby, to Steve, the staff at AIA Los Angeles. And I also want to give special recognition to all of the sponsors. Without your participation as a sponsor, we really could not do programs like this. So we genuinely appreciate your generosity. But before we end the entirety of this, you're all welcome to stay. We have sort of a surprise after connection with John Egan and Lance Simon, who will share a little bit more about the shelter that they brought together. And with that, I want to say thank you for everyone. Thank you for your time. And you are officially now sanctioned to go and help solve this gigantic challenge that we have to provide houses and homes for all.
How about we have to do one more thing? We have to unmute yourself, and everyone has to give everyone a round of applause.
I know that makes sense, and I don't know, maybe.
Thanks, everybody.
Bravo!
Bravo!
Everybody, it's great.
Very good
conference.
Please
Awesome
stay
to
and enjoy the conversation with John Egan and Lance Simon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, all the speakers. Doing good work.
Okay, I'm going to mute everyone again.
Hey, Renee, you want to come back over here?
Okay, John, we'll hand it off to you.
Sure. I didn't know the video was sent out, I believe, yesterday that we had done for the Arroyo Women's Facility. I'm not sure if most of the people here on the call actually had a chance to take a look at it or not. Essentially, in a relatively long-term project, it took multiple years to convert the Armory into the 85-bed facility. too many years, essentially, is what it comes down to. And if, frankly, that's the timeline that we're looking at in relation to converting an existing structure and allowing for people to live in it, the problem that we have now is going to get worse. So Lance and Renee in my office were heavily involved in that, and I thought that I would let Lance and Renee provide us with a little bit of background on the project. The video was shot by Strad, who came in at the last minute and provided that video and produced it within 5 days. And I think that's something that everybody ought to be thinking about here, is the timeline that it takes. We have to make everything as quality as we can, with the most effort that we can, and yet we really do need to expedite what we're doing here in the city, because it's simply taking too long. And the communication also, I think, is key to that, which is why when Will reached out to us and asked us if we would make a video, I said, sure, we can do it, and we can do it inside of 6 days of time, not a problem, just to get it done and to get something out there. We did bring in a professional videographer, so it was very nice of them to kind of take their time immediately out of their schedule. They recognized the need for the bridge housing to be done immediately. So with that, I'll let Lance kind of tell you a little bit of some of the problems, and then Renee was our person. Renee Rodriguez was our project manager in the field, who kind of buttoned everything up at the end, and he can talk about it as well. And then whatever questions people have, we can answer those. Lance?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, this has been an amazing project that took way longer than I think anybody wished it had. It had started out, just a little background, it started out as a state-owned property that was going to be leased by the county. And then the county decided that they were going to buy it while we were in plan check. We were at the state fire marshal. It also took them a while to figure out which department, LA City or LA County should review it. And then when they decided to buy it, they decided after we had gotten through the fire marshal that we were going to go through a full county review. So that was the first sort of protraction to the project. And then during that process, LAHSA figured out quite wisely that they really should have an operating partner, and they brought in LA Family Housing, and LA Family Housing added really great value to the project because they knew better, who their demographic was going to be. So, we went through several iterations of it, and we tried to find really quick solutions, including we looked at a product called Everblock, and that company, I would encourage you to reach out to them because they've made some great efforts to try to make a product that was going to comply with fire regulations. But it's cool. It's basically a gigantic Lego, and you could, create walls and things like that that could be easily moved. So I think part of what we learned from this was we have to keep our minds open, and we have to, as much as possible. The county makes it a little bit harder to interact and be creative, right? But I think the more that we vet creative solutions, the more progress we're going to make. So all along, we also have, what we have to do is we have to look at what we're all about as architects, and that's, creating really great, nurturing places for people. And there were some times when I might have caved and I just said, absolutely not. We have to make sure that we create, safe places and places that we would expect if we were, in a dark place. So that's what we got to. I think when the landscape grows in, you're going to see a really beautiful sort of oasis. There's great natural light. There's places for, introspection and sharing, and I'll let Renee kind of talk about more of the challenges that he went through, because I placed a lot of the construction task on him.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Joan. I think the critical part, and there's been a lot of talk on the chats and thing about adaptive reuse. And I know a lot of you have done rehab. Adaptive reuse, it's sort of the complexities of that, and mainly within that, what Lance just mentioned is times 10. Right? Because in rehab, there's going to be unforeseen circumstances, and that the reuse you know, it's even more challenging because there are certain things you have to preserve. And then as Lance mentioned, we had a timeline of construction, and that's kind of when I came into the project, which was supposed to be 10 months from start to finish. And obviously, that was a bit of a challenge itself, besides the fact that I think it's sort of, this project is sort of a good example of everything that's being said in the conference. As sort of Lance mentioned, this is a LA County property. It's in the city of LA. It's you keep putting all the challenges on it. So I think the sort of the credit to the success of the project is making sure, because I keep hearing people talking about sort of the city, what they do, or the challenges of this, you know, and I think the importance is to make sure that everyone is on the same page in reference to what we're trying to accomplish. And sort of the importance of the architect is to make sure that when we're looking at this, we eliminate the thought of it's better than what they have, and really look at sort of enhancing what they're going to get. And sort of, you know, when I look at this building, we were bringing new life to a building that was unoccupied. I think Lance on the video talks about the fact that they had one office and they didn't want to give up on that office. So we're bringing new life to people, and we're bringing new life to the building itself. So making sure that everyone, creating partnerships to make sure that when we got to the ground, we hit it running. Because problems are going to come up. And we focus on the problems, we're going to kind of be missing the point. So it's more sort of understanding that we're all going to be working as a team to address any challenges, because it's not about Egan Simon architecture, it's not about LA County, it's not about numbers. It really is about the people who ultimately are going to be living here. And whenever we hit a wall with plan check, that was something, you know, many emails went out making sure that everyone understood that we're providing housing for, Lance, correct me if I'm wrong, 85 women. And this is critical. This is what brings everyone to the table. It's the mission of what we're trying to accomplish. And if we had gone and sort of start saying, oh, LA County is an obstacle, or the plan checker doesn't, yeah, that doesn't really foster the relationship necessary to, when we talk about bridge housing, which is what this project is, to bridge the gap in the communication in order to make this project successful. So with that being said, I you know, any questions you guys might have, I would be happy to answer. But that's, I think most of the details of the project are in the film. So that's it for me.
There's one question from Douglas Short saying, Doug, if you want to unmute yourself to address a question to the group, you can.
Oh, which question was it that you referred to? Your video?
It was your last. I'm sorry, where I am, my internet's terrible. It was your last question, or whichever one.
Oh, well, I was asking to the well, first of all, I think that's a great project that you guys worked on. I was really impressed, to John and Lance. So congratulations on that perseverance and creating something new. A question I had earlier, and this maybe, I'm not sure who's still here, but I was curious to know, I'm coming from the landscape architecture perspective. So thank you, AIA, for having everyone able to come and participate in this. I was wondering if there's any facilities thought about in all of our discussions about those who are living in cars. And it seems to me that if we intervene with people who are newly homeless, perhaps living in their cars, is there a way to help them not go further down the path into actual physical homelessness where they're living in a tent? So has anyone thought about solutions? And I guess somebody replied in the text that it's a very politically unpalatable thing because no one wants to provide parking lots and turn parking lots into, you know, camps for cars. But is there other creative ways to think about this subset of the homeless community?
This is Bill Wong. I can I have a question. I have my hand raised for the Egan Simon folks. But yeah, there's a safe parking program. I just encourage you to research the safe parking program, which started in Santa Barbara, and it's been very successful. It's slowly coming down to LA.
fairly sure that mental health services also reaches out and finds people who are living in vehicles in order to try and help them as well. We've had a few projects where the tenants who moved into permanent supportive housing, when they were speaking at openings, were saying that they had been living in cars for years. So I don't think it's a population that is ignored. I just think that it's part of the population of the homeless people that are not in housing.
And I want to tag into that. I think an important thing of that question is understanding what the challenges are. One of the things that we have in this project that, it's mentioned in the film, but I don't know if everyone has seen it, is actually place for putting your pets. And it has a dog run. Because one of the biggest challenges for a lot of sort of people who are homeless is the fact that the only family they have are the pets. And so they're not willing to come into a shelter because most of the shelters, they have to leave their pets behind. So one of the things that was critical in the program, and that's what sort of Lance was talking about, LA Family Housing being a great partner, is understanding that somehow we needed to, again, I might use the word bridge a couple of times, to bridge that gap, is how do we get these people on the shelter if they have to leave their pets behind? So we didn't. This was assigned, the pods that were designed for the sleeping units actually have space, so you can put your crate underneath so you can keep your pet. There's a space, there's a dog run on the site, so we can have the pets go around, and it is fully accessible. So it was kind of like what you're saying in the car, is understanding that people are not on the street because they want to. There are challenges they have to deal with. And we as designers, and I think that's where we come in. In one of the previous conversations, I was thinking, we're not gonna build our way out of the problem that we're talking about. But where the designers come in and their critical input to this is actually being able to provide creative solutions to address the challenges with the people that are, that are trying to get that help. Because some of the regulatory groups, they're trying to be protected, and they put certain things in place that make this job really challenging. So understanding those things, having a dialogue, and saying, hey, how we can address that problem. So there's the cars, so that's a challenge. So how can we address that? And I think we don't have the thing for the cars and the solution here, but I'm using this as a great opportunity to talk about, we as designers have the great ability to think outside the box and how we can connect the dots and come up with solutions, so then we can get the people back into the fold. Because not always is, people are not there because they want to.
No, in fact, Renee, I'll just toss in a little bit there. In my role at Shelter Partnership, I'm constantly finding out more layers, and there's this battle in our lives of like, how many things do you worry about at one point in time, as an individual. But I'm glad that I know about these things, because what it means is, like, I'm working on, both in Shelter, but also in the architecture part of, what's the network of resources of people who can most quickly address these unique things. And, I got someone reached out to me because they don't, at Shelter, from one of the local schools, and they said, hey, we have this I think they called it a community table thing. And people come in on a Tuesday or something like that, and they don't have to say why they're there, and they can pick up clothes and things like that. And then what was shocking was there were 55 homeless families in this one school, and every single one of them is living out of their car. And they don't want to get tracked. Like, they're ashamed. Who wouldn't be? They're ashamed that they're living this way, and they're still making sure their kids get to school, and that's just one more problem. But so what can we do? Like, actually, I think LA Family Housing is still going to do this. We have more parking than we need at this location, and we upgraded the lighting just to make sure that people could safely park there. And I don't know if they're actually implementing it, but they have the capacity to. So I guess my thing is, like, there's plenty of opportunities out there, unfortunately, that there are opportunities. And I would encourage every single one of you to reach out to organizations like Shelter, and you can even reach out to us here at Egan Simon. I mean, we need more partners. We want your creativity. It's important to understand the specific needs of all of these unique individuals suffering homelessness. So like you can't just put the sticker on it. You got to figure out what they need, and then we reroute them to the right organization or the right people who can help. So like I said, you're always welcome to reach out to us, straight to me, lsimon@egansimon.com, and I will put you with somebody who can help or who can collaborate with you.
And Douglas, the landscaping aspects of the Arroyo actually was one of the most important aspects of the project, because homelessness and the ability for people to even enter a building and have a roof over their head is something that has to be addressed. There's a lot of people who live outside and are homeless, and they're fearful of entering a building in and of itself. And so if you look at how this project is oriented, we opened up the backside of the sleeping room so it had a large operable opening to garden space. And then the garden space is broken up into larger communal spaces for small group gathering, and then into individual spaces. Once the landscaping grows in, you can kind of see it from the aerial shot that's in the video. But essentially, when you look at a building and you say that you're going to take people who have been living outside, bring them inside, and you're going to put them into a room that is very dense versus an exterior experience they've been having, which is not. This is a traumatic experience at times for people who are homeless, and you have to take that into consideration when you're designing. You do have to think about how to make this transition better for the homeless person so that they can get recuperative care that's more successful.
Does anybody know what that project is called right now, where they've put mobile homes in parking lots? Like there's one in Los Feliz, Silver Lake, across from where a homeless shelter it's being built right now. Does anybody know?
Just a kind of sanctioned campground or extension of the shelters. Using trailers, but I don't know that there's a specific program for trailers.
Because the one that I know of, they're all brand new mobile trailers, just sitting there, and people are using them, which is a lot better than being on the streets right now. Bill, did you have another question for the group?
Yeah, I had a question. So social distancing requirements have hit the shelter world. How will that affect this particular shelter?
They have isolation rooms that are set up for individuals if they are in the facility and test positive for COVID. And then that way the people don't have to leave the facility. We had an earlier call with last Wednesday that we organized with Midnight Mission and PATH and a few others, which I'm pretty sure, Bill, you could probably grab the link from Will. And they were discussing the same thing in that they've had to set up isolation rooms. We've also started to set up hand washing stations inside of the lobbies of apartment buildings now for the affordable housing we're building. But frankly, we should be having more hand washing stations in all buildings at this point, and they should be at the lobbies where people can wash their hands on their way in and out of buildings. So that's part of what we've seen. They also have hand sanitizer stations, but the hand sanitizer stations, that they if you run out of hand sanitizer, then you could have a lot of complaining. So I think people are leaning more towards just hand washing stations.
And then the specific project, obviously, when it's sort of the idea of being nimble. So it was not something envisioned at the time we started the project. It is something that's being introduced in the program after the fact, because the project, technically was finished last week. So, if the challenges of construction were directly felt, but in reference to the occupation of the facilities, we do have 2 main rooms, and there's the isolation pods that John is talking about. But that's all sort of after the fact, because, this was definitely unexpected and not something that, was programmed into our sort of project at the beginning.